Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Astartes Anonymous podcast, where we would like to show you something. Please take a look at this.
Yep.
Isn't it glorious?
Take a good hard look at this. This is my legacy now.
This is your legacy now. Someone has fucking immortalized this wonderful, one-of-a-kind artwork by you on their fucking, what's this, their leg, their calf or something?
Yeah. Absolute fucking legend, honestly. I mean, like, when I first received a message by Mucklerig, I was like, and they were like, hi, I would like to, do I have your permission to tattoo this on my body, immortalize it? I was like, yeah, fuck yes, absolutely, go hard, my dude. And fucking the day after, they were like, hey, I got a tattoo time for Monday now. I'm gonna get this now. I found a tattoo artist that knows what 40k is, but I had to do some explaining.
My God, would you like to explain to our extremely patient and tolerant audience what it is they're looking at right now?
So, dear audience, you are looking at the brainchild of Red's immense, bottomless imagination and my fucking hard-working art skills. It's this is the cakening of Prospero. And it's, I forget what the fucking meme is called. Hot milk, right? So it's it's Lehman Russ doing the hot milk pose over over Magnus the Red.
Dude.
And as an added bonus, I decided to add the fucking broken tusk between his butt cheeks because I saw an opportunity. So.
I mean, you say Red's bottomless imagination. There is a lot of bottom there. Like, a lot.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
This was something that Moots created at the time of the popularization of the Omni-Man meme.
Yes.
Which is why Magnus looks like Mark Grayson beaten half to death into the floor.
I love the lip. It's just slightly quivering.
I just absolutely love the absolute immaculate rendering here on Lehman's fucking fantastic butt cheeks, honestly. And as an added bonus, the Mr. Mucklerig told me that the artist in question decided to, like, so the background itself is not something that I did. This was something like an artistic choice, but their artistic choice was to make the smoke clouds as butt-like as possible because there was already so much ass going on.
Yep. This is truly the most real depiction of the burning of Prospero that there ever was.
It's so good.
It's certainly something. So, Mucklerig, thank you so much for immortalizing Moots' artwork on your calf.
Thank you so much.
You are, you're a real one.
You're a real one. And thank you to the artist as well. I remember his name is Bill something. We'll link to his Instagram in the description.
Yeah, thanks so much, Bill. I could only imagine what crack-addled mutant you thought wandered into your tattoo shop on Monday. Christ, what an actual trauma.
I like, honestly, I was like, I thought it was a joke when they first messaged me because I was like, there's no way, right? There's no fucking way. And then, you know, I started, as I was, because I was playing D&D whilst, like, suddenly I got a little message, like, I was like, oh shit, the stencil's on, and then, like, an hour later, the line work is done, and then at the end of the session, my D&D session, the fucking tattoo was all ready. I was like, holy shit.
It's definitely a choice.
It's the best choice.
It's definitely a choice.
In my opinion, the best choice.
Right, So let's have a look at our models of the week, shall we?
Yes,
Absolutely.
let's go.
Right, shall we start with Moots' choice? So this is a Vashtor the Arcaphane by Borks, aka
Borks.
Noah. Moots, would you like to tell us why you picked this one?
Because it's just fucking awesome, and the base is fucking cool as fuck. This is probably the most... I mean, Vashtor already is like a...
Yeah.
How do you say? A presence. And this just base really just lifts the whole thing.
No, absolutely.
And the paint job is really good as well. I really like the pallid flesh and the very stark red eyes. I mean, it's a very classic paint job in that sense, but that doesn't take away from it in any way, shape, or form. Really, it looks great in my opinion.
No, the muted tones really do a lot for it, I think.
I love the blood. It's like you can see it dripping down from his claws. It's such a good detail.
That's an excellent detail. That's true.
Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful job there, Borks. Now, let's move over to Zarek's selection next. So, Zarek has picked a model by Wrath of Iron.
Yeah.
A wonderful little fella with a hammer. Zarek, would you tell us about this little fella?
Absolutely. No, so I love this. I'm guessing it's Solar Auxilia. I'm not exactly sure on the kit. Might be one of the new ones. I wouldn't know. But I love the size of the hammer and how it just works. I feel like it shouldn't, but it just does. And the detail of the base with the crushed barrel underneath, you get the impression that the guy just smacked it with the hammer.
Yeah.
It's good. I really like it. It's just clean. It's a nice and well executed kit bash. It's so seamless.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really lovely. And the sort of the pinks, the sort of fleshy pinks are a very out there kind of choice for this, but they work really, really well.
Yeah. It looks really nice. I was gonna say I really like the. I mean, I'm really impressed by the colors, as you said, because it like teeters on becoming brown, but it still has just enough vibrance where it looks pretty grimdark in a sense, and the nice little radioactive pool as well. It just gives that. Very nice contrast,
Yeah. No, that's a wonderful, wonderful job there, Wrath of Iron. So, the next one, is the one that I picked, is by a Caveman Conan. And Caveman Conan has created what he has simply dubbed a Berserker Surgeon, which is a wonderful, wonderful name for a very large boy. I think what he's done here is he's combined Chaos Terminator bits. At top, as you bottom to top, the legs are from a Chaos Terminator.
Mm-hmm.
The torso is from a Tartaros Terminator. The head is from the Havoc's kit. The axe is from a Plague Marine kit. The little doohickeys on his back, the one on the right is from the Havoc's kit, as in his right, and the one on the left is from an Apothecary. The arm, I believe, is a Deathwing Apothecary arm, but I also believe the hand, the gun itself, is actually potentially from a Primaris kit. Not a gun, the little injector thingamajog.
Oh, the reductor.
Thingamajork. Yes, and his arm on his right side is Tartaros as well, but his arm on his left side is, I believe, from a Deathwing Apothecary kit.
Yeah, actually.
Sorry, I really like the kit. I just want to do a fun little breakdown of it.
Yeah, it's really fun how he just... It's sort of a Frankenstein's monster of a kit bash.
Yeah.
But it's done super seamlessly.
Actually, oh my god, no. The torso is not just Tartarus. The back half of it, I think, is like the Chaos Space Marine torso. But it's got the facade of the Tartarus.
You're right. Yes, the whole rear upper torso is Chaos Terminator as well.
It's so clean. That's gorgeous.
That's really nice.
That's a fun mix. Great job. Caveman Conan. Exceptional work there, my friend. That's really, really good stuff. Right. Shall we talk about today's real subject?
Is it real? Is it really real?
It cannot be.
It might be.
It
Holy
is.
shit.
It could be.
So this is not just fantasy?
It's happening.
Whoa.
Caught in a landslide.
No escape from reality?
Easy come.
Easy go?
No, Do you know how long it's going to take us to get through Bohemian Rhapsody at that speed? We're going to be here for an hour.
Look at spoken word. Slam poetry, Bohemian Rhapsody. In my AA podcast, it's more likely than you think.
That might take a little while.
I genuinely love to hear a fucking cover in that style of it's fucking cursed as fuck.
Figaro.
No.
Little high.
Right. Desist. We have a prompt I need to discuss with the blessed audience. So, 2 weeks ago, we released a wonderful little podcast, Zarek, Alex, and I, that we called something along the lines of 20 Space Marine homebrew pitfalls to avoid. And we realized whilst we were doing it, actually mid-recording, we realized we wanted to do the inverse. We wanted to maybe do an episode where we gave you 20 things to work towards rather than to work away from. And to give this episode more of an upbeat, a bit more of a positive inclination, right? To not be so focused on the mishaps and the missteps, but to instead look at, ways you can improve your homebrew, but also enjoy homebrewing. So we've got a nice little mix here of these 20 of things that are going to, help you expand upon your homebrew, maybe ideas and avenues to explore you haven't necessarily thought of, as well as some things that you haven't thought of that may just be fun, that may just you may just enjoy, and the same thing as before. We're not infallible. That big disclaimer we gave you in that 2 weeks ago, we're not infallible. There is a focus with homebrewing to always be law compliant, yada, yada, yada. You don't need to listen to it. You don't. If your idea of having fun when homebrewing is to throw the rules to the wayside and just do what you want, then just do it,
Yeah.
We shouldn't really be saying too much about what you shouldn't do during this episode, in theory. But we may venture there a little bit. And again, if we do, and you don't like what we've got to say, just ignore that shit and enjoy yourself, just...
For sure.
Just make it happen,
I think... it's an interesting point that you bring up there, because for me at least, I'm coming at this from a perspective of I am fully aware of the earliest homebrewing quote unquote taboos that I did. Most of my stuff has, or all of my stuff rather, has gone through an immense amount of revisions, because I started off with the mentality of I'm just gonna do something that sounds really cool, and then I later developed it into, well, I like that, but I'm gonna try and make it a bit more lore compliant now. And that's just how I've developed as a home brewer. It doesn't mean that you have to do exactly like I did, or as Tom did, or as Zarek did.
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the topics we're going to touch on. Actually, mentions this idea that it's worth, at least certainly when you're starting out. In fact, when you're starting out, you should do this, and that's to overshoot the mark.
For sure.
Overshoot the mark and then rein it in afterwards. Have your fun. Be silly, because you can't improve things if you don't make mistakes, right?
For sure.
But with that being said, should we, disclaimer, do what you want. Have fun. Have a good time. If we say don't do something, it's not gospel. We are just homebrew enthusiasts who have opinions. Occasionally those opinions are dog shit. It's up to you to decide if they are or if they aren't. So with that being said, let's move on to the number one.
Hell yeah.
On the screen behind us, number one, define their role within a specific segmentum or region. So tie the chapter's lore to a particular segment or region of the galaxy, which impacts their strategic purpose. Yeah, chapters in different segmentums may face unique regional threats, like Tyranid splinters or chaos incursions or orc hordes, shaping their battle doctrine and outlook on the Imperium in general, right? This will really help define your chapter's purpose as well as the purpose of characters in it, which is something that all chapters need.
It's also you mentioned that it helps develop the way they conduct warfare. It's sort of marches into the territory of how it affects their culture as well, because it's not just their home world, or if they have a home world that influences this, it will be the people that are present in the segmentum or the region. It will be all sorts of everything that is within that region.
Yeah, of course.
And their role can be really important or really unimportant. Like with the Astral Claws, when they were loyalist, they were made with the specific purpose of guarding the Maelstrom. That could be the same sort of overriding purpose that your chapter has, or maybe they're just a more general purpose defensive force.
Yeah. One of the things we discussed in pre about this point is sort of a sub-point that's worth mentioning as well, right here. We almost included what I'm about to say as its own individual point. And when you're defining their role within a specific segmentum or region or solar system, you can homebrew that as well.
Yep.
You will have the opportunity to say, okay, my chapter is stationed in system, Tiberius Bungus A7, right?
Yeah. Do some world building.
And planets Tiberius A7 through A3 are all this kind of planet. Maybe these are the kinds of people stationed on those planets. So you've got it already. You are setting a stage before you are creating a character. That character is your chapter. Your chapter is its own personality, right? But, this is this notion. I think this is a reason why I wanted to put this as number one, because you're creating somewhere that you have more narrative control over to place them into. Now, you don't have to do this. You can just be like, okay, cool, here's my chapter. They're a nomadic chapter. They do all this around the galaxy. At the time of M41 and Gilliman's revival, they're in the Segmentum Solar north, going into the Agrippina sector or something, right? You can do that. But you don't have to. You can pick a location and you can turn that into your location and you can expand on it at your convenience.
Yeah.
So it's a really fun way to just add your own personality on things and control the narrative of what happens in your own space as well. It'll stop an awful lot of problematic questions from other, maybe more critical homebrewers. That's me, for example. I'm a very critical homebrewer. I may say to someone, if they put their homebrew in a particular location, I may ask them, oh, well, how did you handle X or Y event that happened there in that location? And they'll turn around and they'll be like, oh, I don't know, because I didn't think about that. But when you create your own system, in a random sector, you can avoid all that. You don't have to deal with any of that shit. You can only deal with the stuff you want to prompt forwards.
A sort of homebrew life hack that I've developed for myself is because scale is something that can be very intimidating, especially in Warhammer 40k. Obviously, because we're not talking about some small things here. It's systems and whatever. But what I've come to really appreciate for myself as well, at least, is to not see the segmentums or the galaxy or the planets as well as those things, but sort of reduce them in your mind. Reduce them. Say, for example, that the segmentum or the region, see it as, instead of being this big fucking thing, see it more like maybe as a continent or as a country.
Yes. There's this idea of transferring it into a more manageable narrative scale, right?
Because then you can go, all right, each planet is like a city, and then each places in the in the city or on the planet can be reduced to fucking streets or places of importance in that city. For me, that has really helped, at least defining regions, because otherwise you can get very stuck in this idea of like, oh, what the fuck, how do I fill up this huge space with nothingness?
Yeah, it's a very nice and helpful mental narrative framework to keep things manageable. I mean, that is the sole purpose of that train of thought, is to keep things manageable. Yeah. Because, like we even said in that episode 2 weeks ago, it's very easy to get lost in the vastness of Warhammer 40k, both its narrative vastness and physical vastness. But creating a categorization system in your own mind based on what you know, what you understand, is a really great mental framework for handling it in a way that's manageable for you. And it is ultimately your fun and your enjoyment. And to do that, you're going to want a nice way of managing it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, personally, I would just start with the system, your chapter's home system. I wouldn't bother going much further unless you've got specific things in mind. Very often, there'll be a mention of where something is as a sector or subsector, but generally those tend to be throwaways with a few notable exceptions. So you don't feel the need to specify that. But, exploring what's in the system is a good way just to start and to decide if you want to do more.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of a whole segmentum or a whole sector is perfectly viable. I mean, it's still a nice way of saying that you've got a nomadic chapter, a fleet-based chapter, right? Because then the whole sector is the kicking ground, right? But yeah, just, compartmentalize, manage it in a way that's good for you, and create your own boundaries, and more importantly, create your own stage for your homebrew, and just keep all the control within yourself, because the more control you have, the less you need to worry about inconsistencies and inaccuracies. Right, shall we move on to the second one?
Well, yeah.
Lovely.
This one I really like. This one is so important. And we, again, much like 2 weeks ago, there's a few of these that we've got that are going to touch on some stuff we touched on 2 weeks ago, maybe with a slightly more positive framework.
I'll touch on you.
But this one I really like. Say again?
I'll touch on you.
Please don't. Moots has been just full of quips all day today. I was saying it's a real shame we don't at AA have any HR, because Moots would be in just so much trouble. Just absolutely inconceivable amounts of trouble for the things he said to me today. It's not kosher. It's really not, Moots. You got to get it together, man.
This is the perks of being HR.
Go fuck yourself. All right, moving on before Moots says something unforgivable for the 32nd time today. So, number 2, explore your chapter's weaknesses. So, when developing your chapter's weaknesses, focus not only on genetic flaws, right, but also on their combat strategy shortcomings. Perhaps their rigid adherence to a specific battle doctrine leaves them vulnerable in unconventional warfare, or their reliance or over-reliance on close-quarters combat makes them less effective in prolonged artillery engagements. This vulnerability should feel natural, not crippling, but present challenges to test their adaptability, providing opportunities for growth and character development within individual characters and the chapter as a whole. These flaws can make your chapter more relatable, more grounded, showcasing that even the Emperor's finest aren't infallible. And this will also help keep your chapter from appearing almighty in conflicts, which is a pitfall we spoke about 2 weeks ago. It's a very great way of adding extra nuance to you and yours,
A weakness can be defined as a lot of different things. It doesn't only have to be related to combat either. It's we're going to touch on this in a later point, but it can come down to individual characteristics of a personality within your chapter as well, or a culture thing within your chapter. I think I can bring up my own example here of my personal current chapter project, which is the Iron Gorgers, which is a chapter of, and it's basically their thing is that they love replacing their flesh with metal. It's in a very easy explanation. It's I like to think that it's a bit more complicated than that, but it's their culture itself which leads to a lot of problems. Nice, you posted it as well. Oh, you didn't. But yes,
I don't have it.
Well, those sorts of things that are important to note as well.
Yeah, weaknesses can actually be quite an easy thing to do, really. It usually depends on what their strengths are, but sometimes it can just be picking something a little bit arbitrary, and that can be an interesting point to go off of when you want to explore them further. Maybe they have an aversion to a particular foe or a particular way of warfare. Is there something there, something they don't talk about, or is there a reason they try to steer away from it?
Maybe this aversion to a certain foe leads to them making unreasonable decisions in order to fulfill a vendetta or whatever.
Let me tell you guys about a Space Marine chapter, a homebrew Space Marine chapter with a weakness. Mm-hmm. They're called the Grim Wardens. Hello, Brother Garthiel. I know you're listening. So, the Grim Wardens are a chapter who have a Marine in the Death Watch, who are present in mine and Zarek and Aris' Death Watch campaign. Brother Garthiel. Brother Garthiel is of the Grim Wardens. And the Grim Wardens, if we're talking about strengths, are absolutely boundless. Melee combatants out the wazoo. Absolutely fucking lethal. Terrifyingly so. However, they have a weakness that their creator has turned into a narrative strength. And that weakness is that they've got rocks for brains. If you're trying to communicate with a Grim Warden, you have to be prepared to communicate with your fists. If you want to tell a Grim Warden something, if you want to convince the Grim Warden of a course of action, you must be prepared to throw hands with that Grim Warden. It almost doesn't matter if you win or lose by throwing hands, but it matters by the fact that you are prepared to. You know, this always ever-present immediate sign of, show me that you mean it by fighting me. Show me that you mean it by going to commit violence with me. It's a very fun and out there way of creating a chapter. And in a space where these other homebrews are all interacting, it creates a single fixed point of conflict generation, right? Because Space Marines are often most of the time, are pretty good at getting along with each other. But we've got this one guy who is just always ready to create interpersonal drama in the best way possible for a Space Marine. So weaknesses, physical weaknesses, are capable of being narrative strengths. Never forget that.
100%. A good example of that is, actually, speaking of D&D, my current D&D character, Brock, a TNT enthusiastic dwarf who, through his very chaotic and irrational nature, sometimes just happens to propel the story forward by sheer stupidity or sheer like brute force. It is a character flaw of him to be so irrational, to be so strange and erratic, but it moves things forward.
Mm-hmm. Narratives thrive on conflict, and if your Space Marine chapter creates its own conflict, that's all the better.
Yeah. But I think one of the other things about weaknesses as well is we touched upon it at the start very briefly. And I'm not going to drag this on because we spoke about this last week, but I mentioned genetic flaws. So once again, we're going to a very quick thing. I'm going to look at you, cursed founding homebrewers. Remember, when you're making their cursed downside, make it cursed, make it a real flaw. No wishy-washy, make it a real one. Give them the beans.
Made real.
Right?
Cursed.
Shall we move on to number 3?
Let's go.
So number 3 is a really important one. On the screen now. Utilise traditional Space Marine ideology and roles often. Canon Space Marine chapters are by and large unique from one another. However, they all have far more in common than not. Using common Space Marine thinkings is a really great way to help a chapter fit into the setting seamlessly. Yeah. Conversely, making every aspect about a chapter unique or special detracts from a chapter's plausibility. In fact, homebrewing this way is really, really great for homebrewers who don't want to explore too much into the depths of homebrewing. Casual homebrewers. If you are mostly here to paint your minis in a custom fashion and just play them in any way you want, but you don't want to get bogged down with all this big homebrew lore and you just want to have it done really quickly, what you can do is use an established chapter as a template and alter a few little things, and then you're done, Space Marines have so many traditional things that are shared between the vast majority of Space Marine chapters that you are doing your chapter a service by, adhering to some of those things. Mm-hmm. And then it's up to you to choose where you're going to diverge. It's like the rules of music, because you learn the rules of music, and then you're sat there going, well, there is no rules of music. No, there are. You learn them so that you can then carefully choose which to ignore. Yeah?
Yeah, and if you think about it, think of all the homebrews you've seen. how many actually stay close to and cleave to the Codex Astartes? The more you cleave to that, ironically, the more unique you're being, despite the canon stating that most Space Marine chapters stay very close to it. Genuinely, you can make something very interesting and novel by just being normal.
Yep.
Yeah, well, I think what Zarek's saying there, and again, we don't want to keep this super negative, but it is a comment worth noting, because if you've been in the homebrew communities for a long time, you do notice very quickly that there is an abundance of people abundance of homebrewers, who've homebrewed with such an excessive amount of uniqueness that now being more toned down, being codex compliant, and being more in line with canon chapters is actually now far more unique than not. And it's a very fun and interesting sort of commentary of what homebrewers like and what homebrewers want, which is why we always say, if you want to do something just for fun, just do it for fun. Don't pay any attention to this. Just do it for fun anyway. But if you want some of that more, in-depth narrative kind of payoff, then look at the more simplistic things that are shared between chapters,
Yeah. You don't need theoretically to change all the names around, but you can if you want to, but it's all about the nice simplicity of the setting that already exists.
But it's interesting because Space Marines and the various codexes, they do so much heavy lifting for you. Like, you can choose to not take that away from them. Let them do the hard work for you,
Yeah. With that said, like, there's nothing, no one is like saying you can't change a bit of like how a sergeant paints his helmet or whatever, or it comes down to also what fits your chapter in a broad stroke here. It's not that maybe doesn't say a whole lot, but do what feels right for your chapter in the end.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think I really want that to be a running theme throughout this episode, and, because when we did the whole, and I know I repeat myself, but when we did the 20 things to avoid, there was a whole lot. It was a very, by the nature of saying, oh, don't do this, don't do that, there was kind of a negative overture by the end, despite Alex, Zarek, and I laughing a lot and having a really good time with it. We did have a great time with it. But I want this to be more of a positive overture, look to the fun things. So with that being said, should we have a look at something a little bit different?
Yes.
So, point number 4, detail a non-war focus of your chapter. So, besides war, consider something they value or focus on deeply, such as philosophy, exploration, the collection of lost relics. That's a really big popular one. I know that's a popular one. Or the preservation of ancient knowledge or their own ancient history. This can add layers to their characterization without departing from their martial nature, But be careful not to make this facet overshadow their war focus, though, because they are, after all, living weapons. This is a tertiary thing to add to their personality, in the same way that the Blood Angels will occasionally partake in artistry. The Ultramarines will occasionally partake in politics. The Space Wolves will occasionally partake in getting drunk and beating the shit out of each other, and other such things. So it's always there to just sort of add to the greater whole. But it's really fun to go, okay, what would be interesting to see a 8-foot-tall, muscle-bound, meaty man dressed in nothing but a toga do in his spare time?
Whoa. I like where this is going.
And there are definitely going to be non-war elements for your chapter, even if your chapter is a particularly militant one. If you think about even the Black Templars, their whole non-war element is their extreme devotion to the Emperor as a god, in the same way that the Imperial ecclesiarchy sees it. There's always going to be something there. And in this, something you should consider probably is how your chapter feels about the Imperial Creed. Do they cleave a little bit closer to the old Imperial truth while still yielding to the Emperor as their liege above all? Or are they absolute full-blown zealots? This could really inform their values outside of combat and what they think is worth doing.
For sure. I think this is a very interesting point, because before we went into this, to the audience, I'm sorry, but I'm going to use my Iron Gorges as examples a lot when I
Look, the Iron Gorges are suddenly on the screen again.
Whoa, maybe here's this artwork that I did. Whoa, look how cool they are. I swear. Very nice.
What was that noise?
What the fuck? That was a seal dying right there.
Well, that was a Tony Hawk kickflip.
Oh, of course.
No, but as I was saying before we went into this, I was thinking, man, my Iron Gorges don't really actually have anything to fill in the slot. But then I realized that there is a particular point that it doesn't necessarily contribute to what they do in their spare time exactly. But I did make a very detailed description of how their recruits are being inducted into the chapter. Which is the process of them that is a very Matrix-like experience where the recruits are being descended into something that I call the mother framework, where they are being injected with, which is a terrible word, a synthetic vat womb, basically, where the aspirants gestate for a couple of months, preparing to become Space Marines.
Yeah, and if I recall that document correctly when I read it, that process that time in those vats plays a large part of their psycho-indoctrination, because they're not just in those vats, they're not quite unconscious. They're not quite conscious, but they're not quite unconscious either. And so it's kind of like a catalyst for their psycho-indoctrination, spending their time in essentially these drug-fueled sensory deprivation tanks.
Precisely, yes.
Yeah, it's very cool. I remember reading that when you sent that to me the first time, and feeling something that was very akin to the Ghost in the Shell. A Ghost in the Shell, and it was very like almost a Matrix-like, this notion that your physical body is now secondary to where your mental state is going, and how that is affecting your sort of mental state, affecting your thoughts and your feelings, your ethics, your ideals. It's a fun little thing, hacking into the brain and going, here's how you're going to think and feel now. And it's not really outside of the realm of possibility of what's available in 40K, and it's a really nice, unique sort of take on a recruitment trial, because it's not your recruitment in its entirety. They still have to go through all these different surgeries and all these different things to get to where a Space Marine gets.
Precisely.
But it's this one tiny little thing, that sets a tone. And that's a wonderful thing to do, and it speaks so much to the benefits of doing little things in your homebrews, tiny changes you can make that will carry an atmosphere. And it come back to our last point, about utilizing traditional Space Marine roles, and how if your chapter is 99% the same as another chapter that's just that some might even say is boring, you can take that 1% and change the recipe enough for it to feel entirely different.
Precisely.
It just depends on how careful you are with putting that 1% together. But no, I remember reading that document you sent me about their time in the fucking Bacta tanks and thinking it was just very cool.
Well, and that whole thing is like, as you said, that's one little percent that suddenly shifts the tone of what it means for something for this chapter specifically. Yeah.
No, it's very cool. It's very cool. My homebrew, the Midas Saints, I feel like they don't have anything like that, and I'm kind of jealous. With their recruitment, it's very standard. It's very standardized. It's not super huge as part of us compared to other Space Marine things. And so here I am being a little bit jealous at how uniquely subtle you've made something, because my chapter's recruitment is basically just stealing kids from indigenous tribes, which is the case with so many 40K homebrews, something that's basically akin to that, but really, really good job.
Well, thank you. Well, your Midas Saints has a lot of really cool stuff going on for them as well, so, I mean, that's not to take away from your boys in any way, shape, or form. They're very different beasts.
Well, I think we've gone at it in very different directions, because you're building from the ground up. You've gone, okay, here are my steps 1 through 10. 1 is going to be working out their culture, 2 is going to be the homeworld, 3 is going to be their recruitment process, and that's how a lot of people do it, because it's a very standardized way. But for me, the Minor Saints are God knows what number of homebrew that I'm working on. And so for me, I was like, I'm going to start right in the middle. I'm going to start with their combat doctrine, right? And I'm going to work outwards from there. You know, so it's like, I don't see any reason why I can't have something as cool as what you've got, but I'm going to get around to it much slower, because this is the fun thing about the individuality of homebrewing. Different individuals will prioritize different aspects of homebrewing to express themselves. You know, you have found this great form of expression through minute nuance, whereas to me, I'm working with slightly larger strokes, slightly more typical for Space Marine things like a combat doctrine, you know, and focusing on that. Not to say you haven't done your combat doctrine, because I know you have done some work on that.
Just much slower.
Well, exactly, quite. And just like the inverse is true of me. I've done my chapter's recruitment process, but the detail is far less because I'm working on it much slower. So it's a really fun little commentary on what individuals may prioritize when they're homebrewing. So it's very cool. It's very cool.
And really, don't forget to be weird. Just think about pain. Think about the pain glove. That's bloody weird. Why do the siege specialists have a bodysuit that's got some? Frankly, if you read the who was it? Was it Ian Watson's original book on it? It was weirdly homoerotic, but a bodysuit you can go into that makes you feel pain. That's just weird, but it's great. It's so fun.
It's not the only heavily BDSM coded thing in Ian Watson's
certainly is.
I mean, as everyone knows, the 3 steps of world building: insert your fetish, your political ideology, your one reasonable prejudices.
I hate how true that is, honestly. It's cursed. But it works. That's also impromptu tips for y'all here, but it's...
Right, shall we talk about our next point?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a fun one. This one was proposed by Zarek, and I hadn't actually thought of this. In fact, I actually fought against this point for a little bit until Zarek convinced me of its importance. And that is point number 5, exploring your chapter's relationship with their parent chapter. So doing this can add layers of history and tension to their lore, right? That's the obvious one. Whether that bond is one of close brotherhood or, in the case of like a lot of homebrewers, I see do this, and I really like it, and that's of distant sort of indifference, right? It speaks volumes about their identity. A chapter with a strong relationship to their parent chapter may frequently collaborate on campaigns, share traditions, and adopt similar combat doctrines, reinforcing that sense of shared heritage. But alternatively, a chapter that has become estranged from its parent, whether due to ideological differences, territorial separation, or past grievances, might emphasize their independence and development of a unique identity. This estrangement could lead to complex internal politics as the chapter grapples with their heritage whilst forging their own path within the Imperium. I know my chapter is, in my own canon, is very old, right? Very old, been around for a long time. So my chapter has even had successors. One of those successors, only a couple, only 2 or 3. One of those successors, their first successor, which I call the Pyrite Kings, who I have no artwork of. The Pyrite Kings were a very Black Templar-inspired sort of spin-off of my chapter, because I had this idea of what would my chapter be like if they were a little bit more religiously overzealous. And so that's how the Pyrite Kings came about. But then you can actually bring this back to canon chapters. For example, I know who does this the most. It's you Imperial Fist homebrewers. Now, not all of you. Not all Imperial Fist homebrewers. But I know you Imperial Fist guys love to talk about Rogal Dawn. You love to talk about the days of the legions. You know, if I had a penny for every Imperial Fist homebrew that brought it back somehow to the Siege of Terror, I'd have at least 15 pennies. I'd have a good couple of pennies, you know. And I'm not saying this is a bad thing. It just needs to be handled with nuance. But this can really help define things. I think the hardest one to do, actually, is the Ultramarines. I think that's genuinely the hardest, because the Ultramarines have so much going on, so many successes. It would almost be selfish to say that I'm an Ultramarine successor and I have a great relationship with the Ultramarines because they have so many, compared to, say, a Space Wolves or Salamander successor because they have so few. So it makes much more sense to me. And this is just what makes sense to me. It would make more sense to me for those chapters to have a greater relationship with their parents.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can do that in many different ways. You could have them have a positive relationship. It can be a negative relation. It all depends on the history and of the chapter and of the both the successor and the original. I, for example, think it's really fun to have a situation where the successor chapter and the original chapter are in odds with each other. I think that's a really fun thing to do, because then you get this situation where you can start either for yourself or for whoever's reading. Like there's this room to explore, like, why is this? Why are they like this? And then you can make it as vague or as spoken out as you want. I, for example, have the situation where the Iron Gorgers and the Iron Hands met, and the Iron Hands went, "What the fuck are you guys? You get the fuck out," and said, "Don't ever fucking cross my path again." and the Iron Gorgers are like, "No, Dad, please love me." And I think that's a fun sort of alternative interaction you can do. Or you can do that they're best fucking mates. You know, they're like, "Hell yeah, bro," or "Hell yeah, Dad," and or they're just both totally fucking apathetic to each other. Maybe they like look at each other and like, "What the fuck are you? Did you come from me?" Or
well, I really like that, because it's regardless of whether it's a good relationship or an oppositional one, your chapter is always going to be marked by their parent, be it the fact that they actively resist the strictures of their parent chapter, or they want to do it better, or if they just want to emulate them or take it somewhere else, take it in a different direction, do it in their own way while still paying homage to the original. They're always going to be changed by that. And even if you don't know what your parent chapter was, if you've got a lost founding chapter, you can leave impressions there of who it might have been based on, what's sticking around in their culture, what goes back the furthest. And, that can be conflicting. I know, Tom, you've done a fair bit of that with yours.
Well, the Midas Saints... Oh, look, another picture of the Midas Saints on the screen. Whoa.
How did you get there?
I think the thing with the Midas Saints is I have a few headcanons about where they descend from. And so not one of them am I happy with in its totality. But I am happy with saying they don't know. I am always happy to say they don't know who their lineage is. And I'm also happy to say, because this is true in canon chapters as well, that they don't care. Because it's not always true that a chapter's lineage is going to be the most important thing to them. Because remember, this isn't the days of the legions anymore. No. Space Marines will and may often care far more about the Emperor and worshipping the Emperor than doing right by some fucking Primarch who died 10,000 years ago. A lot of chapters just don't know. There was the whole thing with the Soul Drinkers who had no idea who their lineage was. And whilst they did make a point of trying to find out, obviously to no fucking success, it wasn't something that stopped them from doing what they needed to do. And you can do that as well. That's a lovely bit of inspiration there. If you want to keep that mystery, to make the search for that identity part of your chapter's identity, and you still get to keep the mystery. It's a wonderful, wonderful little thing you can do. But for me, my chapter doesn't care. In M37, my chapter had a huge rebranding. They took on a new name and a new everything, thanks to this great big war that almost saw them die, and all sorts of other stuff. So now their current identity, their current creed, is far more important than any lineage 10,000 years ago ever could have been, because now they consider themselves the true embodiment of their creed, their objective, their purpose So yeah, you can pick and choose. I think it's obvious from what I'm saying a little bit that I do encourage people to err on the side of mystery or err on the side of not choosing. But keep in mind, if you say they don't know, there's no reason why you can't hint at 1 Primarch or 2 Primarchs or, keep that mystery alive or after doing your homebrew for 6 months, write a short story that's like 2 pages long and it's just some dialogue where they find out where their gene seed comes from.
Yeah.
You have the power to create your narratives as you see fit or retcon as you see fit. You can change whatever you like. It's all yours,
You can sort of bake the mystery as well into it's sort of a little mini narrative in of itself. For example, you could have the chapter itself full-heartedly believe that they come from a certain chapter, but that chapter doesn't recognize them or has never heard of them or something like that. For some reason, your homebrew chapter fucking, they're like, yeah, no, we come from the gene seed of fucking Mr. Bing Bong but Mr. Bing Bong and his sons go, no. we looked in our records here and your name isn't here, buddy. And
there's a whole narrative development in there as well.
Yeah.
Adding to characterization. And it's great, and it's a lot of fun, dealing with red herrings and missing links.
Yeah,
it's all good fun. Do you have anything for this one, Zarek?
Not really, no. I think you guys have just said everything.
Everything.
So, shall we move on to the next one?
Yes.
Let's go.
So this is a fun one. This is one that, again, this was another one I wasn't super sold on putting in here, but then realized it was quite important after having these to explain it to me a bit more. And that's number 6. Give your Space Marines individuality, right?
Please do it.
And I say Space Marines, not chapter, although I do mean chapter as well, but I say Space Marines as in individuals, right? While Space Marines are often portrayed as, stoic and monolithic warriors, giving them individuality can add so much depth to a homebrew chapter without compromising on what they are. Each battle brother could have, unique. Each battle brother in a squad could have, unique personality, unique personality, traits, skills, or quirks that reflect their origin, their experiences, and their role within the chapter. One Marine may be known for his cold pragmatism in battle, while another is fiercely idealistic, believing in the Emperor's mercy as much as his wrath. These subtle differences in demeanor and outlook not only enrich their characterization, but also empathize the humanity that still lingers within them, making a chapter feel more alive and dynamic. And I really mean that when I say humanity in them, I really mean that. I know I said this 2 weeks ago, but the great thing about Black Templar books is Black Templars get this reputation from YouTube videos and YouTubers and memes for being just these one-sided religious nutjobs, but they're not. They're so human. They're so much more human than people give them credit for. And there's no reason why your Space Marines can't be too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think the most important thing for me when it comes to giving your Space Marine individuality is to give them an actual personality. This also comes down to the chapter itself, but I'll get to that in a bit. Because for me, when I think giving my characters individuality, it goes over to giving them purpose. Because a lot of the time people saying, okay, we're going to make my character, I'm going to give him personality, and they put these sort of shorthand, maybe not buzzwords, but they say, oh, he's stoic, he's courageous. Those aren't, in my opinion, at least to me, when I make my characters, they aren't, that's not what makes a personality. That's more so, something a bit different for me. What makes a person is what motivates them, their beliefs, their orientations, and also orientations on a theme. If you have a theme for your characters or for your chapter, and I mean a theme by a theme that a story theme. For my Iron Gorgers, I have the narrative theme to be the fact that the Iron Gorgers just absolutely destroy themselves. Their thing is that they mutilate themselves, and for the main character of my story, more like Lux, the chapter master, this theme of like you're losing your humanity is supposed to be like a reflection of him losing his childhood, him disappearing as a person and becoming less and less. And now, I'm not saying you have to do that, that's just me being a fucking idiot, I guess, but it's how I enjoy writing characters, and I think it's important to keep in mind that giving your characters that is more than just buzzwords is what really drives giving your chapter and your characters real personality.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
With what you were saying about themes moots, another big thing for individuality is a difference of opinion. I think every single Space Marine novel or book will always have two brothers of the same chapter disagreeing on core principles. There will always be an older Space Marine who's usually more set in their ways, and a younger upstart who has a slightly different take on the chapter cult or their particular beliefs, or maybe they were recruited from a new location, so they've got a different background to the rest of the chapter. There's always going to be a big difference in how they view the galaxy, even on the most minor things. Actually, a really, really amazing example, if you want some examples for this, is to go and play the Dawn of War 2 campaign.
Yes,
there's such brilliant dialogue. In particular, is it who's the Assault Marine?
I suck with names. I'm terribly sorry.
I know Tarkus is the Devastator, but the Assault Marine is from the Hive world, and I think the others are generally from I forget what their homeworld is, but they're from the main desert world, most of them. And because of this, he has a really disparaging view of Imperial nobility, because he knows they would never lift a finger to save the lower orders. And it gives a really interesting sense of bitterness towards them that other members of the chapter just do not have. And so if you're going into your Space Marines, think about what are the different worlds that they could recruit from, or what are the different walks of life that they might have come from, that they might have had a very brief window into, that they've not had the chance to grow up and think about this properly and understand all the nuance of it. They were taken when they were children. They still have a child's view of the injustices or justices of where they've come from. And
it's really fun you said. So I just want to interrupt really quickly, because that's something you've just touched upon that I've sort of thought for years, and that's that it takes decades and it takes centuries for Space Marines to grow up. Space Marines get such singular exposure of existence, such a narrow field of view on things. It really does, and it really does help you with your characterizations as well. If you know that certain Space Marines you're dealing with have had that chance to grow up versus those who haven't, like you mentioned a moment ago. Definitely.
I think this also ties in very perfectly with, as you were saying, Zarek, if you, for example, if your chapter picks up people from different worlds and whatever, we were talking about this in point number 1, this is a perfect also opportunity to do a little bit of world building in a region or a segmentum, where you can fill that the places with the worlds that they picked, they randomly pick these characters up from. But yes, you were going on about your point. What were you saying, Derek?
Oh yeah, I had lost my track there. But yeah, basically, I was going to say something about the fact L plus motherless plus fatherless plus plus no childhood plus psycho-indoctrination brain rot. That's all they get to grow up on.
That sounds about right, I think. So, shall we move on to the next point?
Yes.
Hell yeah.
Now, this one is one that's obvious, but desperately needs to be said. So this is point number 7. Have an in-depth exploration of your chapter's combat doctrine. Your chapter's combat doctrine should reflect not only their preferred methods of war, but also the underlying philosophies that drive them into battle. Consider how their tactics evolve based on their environment, enemies, resources. For example, a chapter stationed near the Eye of Terror might favor rapid deployment and brutal shock tactics to combat chaos incursions, right? With a particular focus on psychological warfare to counter the morale-destroying influence of the warp. Or alternatively, a chapter born from a harsh desert world may prioritize endurance, attrition, and precision strikes, reflecting their ability to outlast and outmaneuver their foes in protracted engagements. Really delve into how they adapt to different battlefields and enemy types, and emphasize. I had the same thing yesterday, not yesterday, last episode, and emphasize the evolution of their strategies over time as new threats emerge, allowing their doctrine to tell a story of both history and necessity. And remember, I've just realized this whilst thinking about this: Space Marines are always adaptable. This is one thing I will warn against with combat doctrine. When you write your chapter's combat doctrine, remember it is not infallible. It is very fallible. Space Marines need to be able to adapt. This comes back to something we spoke about earlier with weaknesses, right? If your chapter has a combat doctrine that is, that brutal shock assault tactics that we were talking about, you may find that they are easily countered by X or Y. That doesn't necessarily mean they're always going to lose against X or Y. Just remember, Space Marines can adapt, but they may not adapt quite so seamlessly into what they're not used to. Okay, and please, oh god, I said I wasn't gonna say don't do things. Actually, I think everyone will agree with this one. I think this one's not too bad. I think everyone will agree with this. Please don't write it when you're doing your homebrews. Please don't write it so that their combat doctrine is unless their combat doctrine is to always adapt, kind of, you're writing them a la Ultramarines. Please don't write their combat doctrine as they use this to just overpower every problem. If your combat doctrine is tank warfare, please don't write it so that no matter the issue, they always find a way through tank warfare, because then you just kind of devalue what tank warfare actually is and the kind of special nuance that comes with that, or whichever other, kind of doctrine you are looking at using. I think.
And even if they are stubborn and they stick to one mode of war, they have to take the L. They have to get hurt. Bad things have to happen for them. And like with individuality, there are going to be people who in the chapter who realize, hey, this is kind of stupid. Why are we doing this?
Yes.
Usually the younger ones, because
Yes.
the older they get, the more stuck and set in their ways they are.
The opposite can be true as well, though. The opposite can be absolutely true, where a chapter has a younger Marine who's just been freshly indoctrinated into his chapter's cult. And then there's the older Marine who's survived for 300 years when the average is barely 200. And he knows that he's worked out that his chapter's combat doctrine revolves around spending Space Marine lives far more than it should. And so he's going to know, and he's going to be the one to pose alternatives. So keep that in mind when you're reflecting your narratives, But when it comes to exploring your chapter's combat doctrine, remember that combat doctrine stretches beyond the battlefield. I think that was the main reason that made me want to put this point in here, because it really can show a lot, not just with the combat doctrine influencing other things, but other things influencing the combat doctrine. For example, like I said before, about how if you come from a certain homeworld with certain environmental restrictions or things in place, that may be a contributor to their mental state, and their mental state will contribute to their combat doctrine. So, just keep in mind that your combat doctrine is far more than just a preferred method of war.
That is absolutely true, and I think it also comes down to, I think a lot of people, when they think Space Marines or Warhammer 40k in general, actually, is the big battles, right? They imagine the hundreds of Space Marines charging the thousands of chaos demons that are on a open field, right?
Yeah.
But combat doesn't always look like that. Sometimes it can be something as close and personal as a kill team strike. It may be your chapter thinks, man, big fight, big open battle, I'm having a stroke. The big fights on an open field are stupid. I'm gonna tactically find my way into your home and break your Wi-Fi or something. I don't know.
Well, there's truth in there, because if you think about the old adages said about the wings of Imperial military, the Imperial Guard is the Emperor's hammer. The Space Marines are the Emperor's sword. They are precise, and they will focus a single threat.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, this idea that they are a scalpel striking force compared to that hammer. A surgical striking force, a surgical instrument. And it is fun because we can step back and we can look at the Imperial Guard as this giant thing, and we can look at these big, wonderful Space Marine artworks, like what Moose is talking about, like that fucking glorious. We mentioned it last time, that glorious 3rd edition Black Templars artwork. But the vast majority of Space Marine engagements are those scalpel engagements. Just remember, it's not the days of the legions anymore. The days of huge, colossal quantities of Space Marines taking to the field is something that is seldom seen outside of great crusades like the Indomitus Crusade and the absolute shenaniganery of the Black Templars.
Well, it's
not to say you can't do these things, but just remember that these are things that happen in controlled quantities.
Well, more. I think so. More importantly, these are things that are very telling of how your chapter works, who your chapter is as a grand character. In the case of my boys, they prefer these smaller surgical strikes because they are a nomadic chapter. And because they are a nomadic chapter, when they find recruits, and if those recruits make it, are scarce. It's unreliable, so they can't afford to have those big battles. They still do sometimes because they like tanks, and they're like Space Marines. They're gonna have to do those kinds of combat scenarios from time to time, but the individual value of a Space Marine becomes so much more for them specifically. And maybe your dudes have the opposite problem. Maybe they have a super easy time recruiting Space Marines. So throwing them out in the hundreds against enemies on that big fucking open field, is something that they can do. And
well, it's like the Space Wolves, right?
Yeah. Precisely. Or maybe it's entirely because, hey, shit, we just fucking love duking it out with sword and shield on the fucking grassy knoll or something. I don't know.
Well, this can actually come back to our first point about what sort of stage have you set for them.
Yeah.
Because if they are a nomadic chapter, if your chapter is nomadic, you're going to have a difficult time explaining how they can constantly engage in these giant siege warfares, But if your chapter has a homeworld, and that homeworld has strong ties to the local forge world, suddenly the idea of your chapter constantly partaking in great big siege warfares with, mechanized assaults, now that suddenly becomes a lot more plausible and a lot more spooky. It's like, well, this chapter's really spooky, but if you draw them to the edge of the space they control, then suddenly they're a lot less spooky because they can't have that, huge influx of reinforcements. Because remember, it's always a balancing act. It's always a give and a take a little bit. You can't just have everything. I mean, you can if you want to. If you want to be that guy, you can. But it's always a balancing act. But I find that working within that sort of challenge is the fun of it. At least for me.
And also, don't forget, sometimes having just a squad to spare against an endless tide is the most quintessentially Space Marine thing ever. There is some great artworks from 3rd and 4th edition that show like maybe a squad, barely a squad, of Marines in this giant hall as they're surrounded by mortals that they're just beating the shit out of. And that's something to remember, is that the environments of 40k are so massive. But this is a dying age. these battlefields are occupied by so much fewer than there once was.
Yeah. Well, think about Space Marine 2.
Mm-hmm.
The narrative of Space Marine 2. Spoilers for anyone who's still not played Space Marine 2. But Titus and Co. What is it? What's his face says? I've forgotten the guy's name. Who's the guy that looks like me?
Akaran.
The bald guy with the beard.
Yeah.
Akaran. And also Akaran. Yeah, and Akaran's like, I can share 6 Marines. I can spare 6. And so there's like 9 of them. That's not even a full squad. That's such an awkward fucking number. But that's where the narrative happens. We've got the entirety of the second company, and eventually we get, plus the Victrix Honor Guard and Calgar as well. Yet the narrative takes place around just these 3 dudes, because that is it. That's where the intrigue of the setting is borne out. So yeah, it's a fun one. It's a really, really fun one. Gosh, the next point, number 8, actually really connects this. So this one was, obviously have that in-depth exploration of your chapter's combat doctrine. But 8 is kind of a co-point to that, and that's have your chapter's combat doctrine influence non-war choices you make for your chapter. So a chapter's combat doctrine should not only define their approach to war, but, also influence their decisions outside of battle, shaping their culture, governance, and day-to-day operations. For example, a chapter that excels in rapid strike tactics and hit-and-run warfare might favor mobility and efficiency in all other aspects of their existence, non-combat aspects of their existence. Their fortress monastery could be designed for swift deployment with minimalistic yet functional halls, and their recruitment process may emphasize adaptability and speed. Even their diplomacy with other imperial factions could reflect this doctrine, preferring quick and decisive interactions over drawn-out tactical political negotiations. Like the Ultramarines. This creates a coherent identity where your chapter's war philosophy permeates every other aspect of their existence. Because remember, they're living weapons. They're living weapons, and this is how living weapons act. If a weapon is born to shoot something, it'll find a way to solve every problem by shooting it. And just try and keep in mind that singular characterization. That's why some people, there's 1 or 2 homebrewers that I really respect who say start in your culture and then do everything else. But I've had this conversation with them. I think we all agree that the other is equally correct. But the conversation I had was start with your combat doctrine and build outwards from there. That's my personal philosophy on this. I mean, you don't have to do that. I'm sure that even you two haven't done that.
No.
No. You don't have to, right? But that's that for me.
With combat doctrine, yes, absolutely. That's where I started.
Oh.
Excellent. So for me, that's a really big one, because again, it's like even if you break down homebrewing a Space Marine force to its core elements, its absolute boiled down essence, it's a fighting force. They're a force of killers. It is people who rock up to kill. And that core of them, how you've defined that core of them, should have some permeation throughout the rest of their endeavors.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's not how I personally build my homebrews, but it's definitely a effective way of going about it.
Right.
Oh, you will forget how I got there, right? Forget how I got there, because that's just how I started and how Zarek started this one. But you don't need to start with the combat doctrine to get to a place where your combat doctrine influences other aspects of your homebrew.
Mm-hmm.
It's just important that on some level it does. Take the Iron Hands. They're such an easy example. The Iron Hands are the epitome of cold, calculating, and emotionless. They are like that in everything they do. Their combat doctrines are cold, calculating, and emotionless. A member of the Iron Hands will get himself killed like a number ramming against a wall much faster than most other Space Marines, because they are like no hesitation in knowing I am this expendable cog in a machine. It's time for me to die. They won't even think that. They'll just act.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas other Space Marines may go, this whole honorable, it's my time to die. I'm here to serve the Emperor, yada, yada. The Iron Hand won't do that. The Iron Hand won't think that. He will just march to his death, and that permeates throughout the rest of their thing. It's why the Iron Hands have no fucking sense of humor. It's why they have no interest in maintaining cordial relationships with anyone other than the Mechanicus, because their cold functional logic tells them the Mechanicus is the only ones who can give them what they truly need. They don't need more bodies. They don't need more space marines. They need more weapons. You know, and you can take that into your stuff as well. If you have, much like in the inverse of what I said, if you have a combat doctrine that's slow, methodical, likes to scout things, likes to really understand one's enemy before going in one swift motion, you may find that that's a Space Marine chapter that is largely political, that will communicate with rogue traders. They'll communicate with trade ships. They'll communicate with the Mechanicus, the various Astra departments. You know, these will be people who will speak to other Space Marines, and their first instinct when they meet other loyalists will be camaraderie, because the assumption of camaraderie leads to friendships and more power. You know, so it's this idea that slow versus fast, big versus small. There is always ways to bleed your combat doctrine into other aspects of your homebrew.
That's true. That's true. I agree with that.
And I think just beyond that, I think one of the reasons that the Iron Hands work so well as an example is because when they were conceived, they're not just conceived as a military force. They were conceived as a concept, as a kind of marine. And marines are weapons, and so you have to conceive of them as a particular kind of tool. And what does a tool do when personified? It applies its force to all aspects of life. And so, I think it's my turn to pull on my homebrew, the Knights of the Blanched Hollow. They're defined by the Moritat Protocol, essentially operating on their own and working with civilian populations. And in a sense, I conceived of them as something similar to knights errant in history. You know, they just go out, do a quest by themselves in it, and they'd be helped.
Blood.
And they'd be helped by their serfs and whatnot. And so for me, when I was writing them, of course, it was really nice just to take the Moritat Protocol, because it was a fun little thing as a Raven Guard successor to work with. But then, as well, you get to fill up their culture based on that fighting style. And so, what does a knight need? A knight needs attendants to arm him, disarm him. And so, naturally, outside of battle, they have their own personal attendants and their own personal coterie of other people. And, well, now it just makes sense that their scouts are actually just trained as serfs in a similar way to the Black Templars.
Yeah.
And really, if you conceive of your chapter as a concept and not just as a military, it should all come together really, really nicely.
Yeah. And it sort of leans into that idea of being very fluid. You know, it keeps your options open. It keeps you in a place of control. It keeps you in a place of understanding. And more importantly, it helps keep you in a good spot where you're ready to apply what you're learning. Because as you're going through making homebrews, whether it's one homebrew or dozens, you're always going to be learning. And you're not just going to be learning what's potentially objectively more law compliant. You're going to be learning what you like more and what you don't like. Because there's homebrewers out there. I can think of like 3 off the top of my head who I think are some of the best homebrewers I've ever met. And they and I disagree on things. You know, none of it's set in stone. But as long as you're open to that learning and the application of that learning, at least then you are in a good position to say, here's a lesson I've learned. I disagree with its application. Therefore, I'm not going to use it. You know? It's always about learning. You know, it's always about getting better, improving, understanding your own abilities more. And it's a fun one as well, because it's always, you're always improving as a writer as well. I think a lot of people forget that, you know, that homebrewing nowadays is, a lot of people like to just do bullet points. You can do bullet points. That's fine. A lot of people are using ChatGPT to generate their whole, you know, chapter documents, which is, it's a choice. It's certainly a choice. But ultimately, if you're really putting the beans in, you're going to find that you're going to improve as a writer. And forgetting your lore knowledge and your lore understanding, whether you choose to have your chapter's combat doctrine be X or Y, or its influence be X or Y, your homebrew will always improve if you're improving as a writer. And that's just the bottom line, you know.
I can't.
Shall we move on to the next one? Does anyone else has anything else you want to go over here?
I can't believe beans were mentioned. So fucking British of you. Damn.
I like beans. There is a reason that beans are above the fireplace in our little outro, sir.
It's true. It's true. Good beans.
Good beans, indeed. Yep. If you want to have some nice tasty beans, I'm sure you all know this. What you do is you get your frying pan, you put it on high so it's nice and hot, and you get some either lardons or chipolatas, and you chuck them in there. You could do both, but if you do both, you're going to want to bring 2 tins of beans, not 1. You put them in until your lardons and chipolatas are a little charred, so that you've got some of that char on the frying pan.
My bean is baked!
And then what you do is, as that's there, you take your lardons, you leave your lardons. If you're using chipolatas, take them out, cut them into tiny bite-sized chunks, chuck them back in the pan, and whilst they're frying off again, you've still got that char around the pan. That's when you chuck in your beans. Keep it nice, high and hot, move it around, put in a little bit of water if you need to, and what's going to happen is that char is going to seep into the tomato sauce of the beans.
I have my
give them this
fucking
really
face
lovely
in my hands
bacony
right
taste.
now.
What you can do is you can then...
outburst must cease.
What you then can do is you can put them in a bowl, and if you're like me, you'll get some shredded vintage cheese to go on top of that as well. It's really tasty, and you could have maybe some ciabatta bread on the side,
as it is, Tom,
Reject.
please,
or
God.
you know,
I'm gonna scream.
Seize this Britishness right now.
Anyways, moving on to our next point.
Don't do that again, or I'm going to put down a fucking recipe for haggis.
Number 9. Consider
9.
how the chapter would react to recent law events / advancements. So when crafting your chapter, please consider how they would respond to the monumental shifts in the galaxy caused by recent lore events. You know, the resurrection of Rabute Gilman and the introduction of Primaris Space Marines that might spark reverence, skepticism, or even unease within your chapter. You know, the presence of the Adeptus Custodes now fighting alongside the Imperium forces would further influence their perception of duty and hierarchy. The return of Lionel Johnson, if you're potentially in that part of space, and, you know, the continuing battle of the Fourth Tyrannic War could, you know, divide their focus between newfound threats and old rivalries. The galaxy-rending Cicatrix Maledictum and the Noctis Eterna that followed the fall of Cadia, you know, that could leave lasting scars in your chapter. Mm-hmm. You know, their stance on these events would reflect in their loyalty, adaptability, and role within the greater Imperium and how they orchestrate themselves. These are all huge things, and there's many, many more. Of course, you don't have to. You can pick and choose. It often has an awful lot to do with galactic geography, where your chapter is stationed. Yep. But in general, most of these things are going to be huge. Every single Space Marine chapter. This is why a lot of the old guard weren't happy about Guilliman coming back, because Guilliman coming back changed everyone's homebrews. Guilliman's coming back changed fucking everything. Even if you were a fucking Iron Hand and you had absolutely Iron Hand success with absolutely no emotions left whatsoever, the return of a Primarch to take the seat of power within the Imperium was such a colossal overturn. You know, the Cicatrix Maledictum is the other really, really, really big one, because unless your chapter is Ultima Founding, you have to decide what the fuck they did in response to the galaxy cutting in half. Mm-hmm. You know, these are huge, huge things. I think you've got some stuff to say on these, don't you, Zach?
I absolutely do. Well, first things first, you've probably, if you've done step 1, well, bit 1 that we've done here, if you figured out where in the galaxy your chapter is, you've kind of already decided which side of the Cicatrix Maledictum they're going to fall on. You know, Imperium Nihilus, or what's the main one called? I can't believe I've forgotten.
Imperium.
Imperium Sanctus. It's Imperium Sanctus, right.
Oh, okay.
Imperium Sanctus is Imperium Nihilus. You'll know what side you're on there. If you're on Imperium Sanctus, a big question for you is, did your chapter answer the call to join the Indomitus Crusade? And if so, what fleet were they attached to and what direction did they go? There's so much plot here that you can just, oh, great, yeah, there's an event in our history. Yeah, we fought with Fleet Octus across this region of space, and we encountered these enemies, and we got these cool badges to show for it. A lot of the minis you'll come across do have like Indomitus Crusade badges on them, just sculpted on. I believe those are the crucifix looking things. They imply Indomitus Crusade. So if your chapter didn't participate, then that's a consideration to have, is they wouldn't have those markings that a lot of other Space Marines would have. And beyond this, if you're in the Imperium Nihilus, how are you surviving? Are you okay?
Are you okay? Do you need a welfare check?
Yeah.
It's on the way. It's going to take a while. You might not be okay.
And how close did your chapter get to just dying out completely? Did they try to make contact with the Imperium when that formed, or did they immediately start trying to define their own empire? All these things can lead naturally from the elements of their chapter or from the personality of their chapter master.
Yeah,
definitely. No, I think it's this is something that a lot of people, funnily enough, maybe don't really take into consideration, and I think it's for a lot of old heads. This is something that for a long time really wasn't necessary to really need to take into consideration the world events, so to say. Because before the 8th edition, Warhammer was much more of a sandbox than it is now these days. And now we find ourselves in a period of time in 40k where we have big world events that shake up things and make things turn and move. And taking into consideration how your chapter reacts to these events tells a lot about the chapter in itself. It tells a lot about the individual characters in your chapter, because maybe there's conflict within your chapter about how to react to these things. Maybe Chaplain Hingadinga thinks that fucking Gilliman is cringe, and fucking Apothecary Hergadurg thinks that Gilliman is the fucking tits, right? And that creates conflicts. And like we've said before, conflict is good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's you're not here's the fun one, because it's the way you talk about it being a sandbox is more true. Used to be a sandbox is more true than you realize, because since these new editions and GW increasing the speed in which it releases new editions, there's been more things too that you have to sort of keep in mind. Not have to, but you could keep in mind, right?
Yeah, of course.
Smaller events, like let's say you were in the Imperium Nihilus, you now have to ask, what is your chapter master's or your chapter command's response to Lord Commander Dante of the Blood Angels basically being your official lord and master?
Yeah.
Second only to Rabute Gilliman. Because if you're a loyalist chapter and you're rocking around in the Nihilus, Dante can give you orders. He is the regent of Imperium Nihilus, right? That is his title, correct?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's like, there's so much going on, and you do need to tread a wee bit carefully, but you can also pick and choose, because these things can actually add as well. I know that in other videos and podcasts and stuff that I've done, I've often discouraged people from trying to involve their chapters too much in the big ongoings of what happens. Try not to involve your chapters personally with the events of Primarchs and such. But when it comes to Primarchs like Gilliman and these big shifting moments, even if you're not going to be directly involved in them, by God, can your chapter have a fucking opinion on them? And that opinion can have an effect on their culture.
For sure. And, I was going to have a point about this. Nope, I lost it. Never mind. I forgot.
Oh, well.
I did a you. You did exactly this last time in the episode as well. Well, shit. Maybe it'll come back to me. But something else I can talk about is the example I have. Oh, yeah, right. Now I remember. Maybe your chapter in face of all of these, if you don't really feel the need to play with any of these, you could also just go, they haven't heard the news. Maybe they're in a bit of this far enough where they're like from the galactic core where the fucking Cicatrix Maledictum has teared asunder the fucking galactic plane, and they're like, oh shit, man, well, how about we go to fucking Ultramar and check what's going on there these days? And they're like, faced with this giant fucking wall, and they're like, what the fuck? What is all this bullshit? That's an alternative. Like, maybe they never get the chance to even hear the news that Dante is now Lord Commander of Imperium Nihilus. That's maybe they don't know that Gilliman is around.
Yeah, I mean, it's perfectly fine just to not interact with these things. Easiest way I think you could do that is just by throwing them into a really intense war zone in a very protracted war.
Yeah.
They're not leaving for anything. They've got a sworn duty to see it through.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, I'd love to sit here and talk to you about Gilliman, but I've got orcs coming out of every orifice. You know, there is only so much you can do when you're being besieged by the greenskins.
If I recall, is it
Definitely.
like there's is it the Iron Lords who are currently sitting around babysitting a species called the Barghesi, just keeping just keeping them and the Tyranids apart, because if the Tyranids eat them, then they're going to become unstoppable killing machines that can make even more effective aggression cans. There's a canon reason for why that chapter is staying put and not moving and just doing their own thing. Is they've got a mortal threat that they need to contain. They can't be bothered with the Indomitus Crusade in the large part. Sure, they might send 50 guys. They can figure it out or die. Who cares? This is life or death for the Imperium. We have to do this duty. And that's often the story for quite a lot of Space Marines, is that they are the wall against the terror. They have to do this job because no one else will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny that the Barghesi don't come up that often.
I've never heard of them before. This is the first time.
They've been a problem since the Great Crusade.
Really?
Bile experiments with their organs.
Damn Barghouses.
Can we do the next one, please? We need to move on. Between your recipes, Tom, and Moots' interjections, we'll never see the end of this.
Alright, fuck this. Number 10. Point number 10. Point number 10. Explore your chapter's armoury. So, exploring your chapter's armoury is an excellent way to differentiate them from others in both their warfighting capabilities and, maybe more importantly, their cultural identity. For instance, your chapter might have an abundance of ancient Predator tanks and Thunderfire cannons, due to a strong bond with the Adeptus Mechanicus allowing them to excel in siege warfare. However, they might lack fast-moving assault vehicles like Land Raiders or Storm Talons, which forces them to adopt a slower, more methodical approach to combat. Also, keep in mind the combat doctrine stuff and further culture, etc. with this as well, right? It's all relevant. This, all organs of a single organism, right? This imbalance could shape their tactics and even their mindset, leading to a culture that values patience, precision, and overwhelming firepower over those rapid strikes. Alternatively, a shortage of heavier armor could instill a reliance on infantry tactics and a culture that emphasizes brotherhood, where every battle brother is more valuable due to the scarcity of war machines to absorb casualties. These factors not only define how your chapter fights, but also how they view themselves. Yeah, this can stretch to all sorts of things, ranging from quantities of Terminator armor or other things. What were you talking to us about earlier, Zarek, in regards to the Iron Hands and the Raven Guard?
Yeah. So with the Iron Hands, one of their big famous things is that they've got very little Terminator armor, and as a result, they tend to use Terminator armor as just for individual sergeants within a squad who've got their Terminator honors. While their squad mates might not have Terminator armor themselves, their squad will be led by one. And that's how they make use of this limited resource. Meanwhile, the Raven Guard have in excess quite a lot of land speeders, RIP land speeders, but skimmer technology is generally favoured by them, so they'll make greater use of it. But also, they're lacking battle tanks. It's always a surplus and a deficit. I think most chapters tend to have more of one thing and less of another. And that's really fun if there are particular units in the game that you really like. If you want to have like 6 Predators or something in your list, cool. Your chapter loves tank engagements. That's their thing now. But it's something to consider on a even lower level with just equipment. If your chapter is all about melee combat, maybe they have more power swords. Maybe they have less heavy weapons. Hell, maybe they have their own distinct squad types that they've formed due to the resources that they have or their preferred way of war. It ties into all the different bits we've been talking about with their combat doctrine and even their relationship to their parent chapter is important here, because they will probably inherit a portion of their parent chapter's armory. That tends to be how it goes.
Yeah.
For sure.
It's a fun one. I mean, I don't want to spend too much time on negativity in this app, because we did a lot of that with the last one. But I will say, do be careful with this. Because again, it is a balancing act, and the extremes in both directions do cause problems. You do not want to rock up to the Homebrew competition 1, 2, 3 with your chapter entirely kitted out in Terminator armor and justifying it by saying they own no vehicles. And the inverse is true. It's a difficult one. But just remember that no matter what, Space Marines are and need to be adaptable.
Yep.
Now, if adapting is harder for them, then it's harder for them. If they have to take more L's in certain engagements, then so be it. But Space Marines are adaptable. There is no chapter that will try and hammer the triangle through the circle's hole. It will always try and find the circle, even if it fumbles with it a lot, because for some reason they've only got Terminator suits of armor and no tanks. So do keep that in mind, and do play with the balance a little bit. Again, like we said at the start, fucking ignore me and us if you don't like what we're saying. Just have fun with it. But yeah, there's things you can expect. There's things you can expect, and it's a really fun way to contribute to the characterization of your combat doctrine and your chapter's culture as well. For example, the Midas Saints. There you go. Put another picture of the Midas Saints on the screen. Tell you what. So one of the things is by Kanfi or Fee Nugan on Instagram. Great piece of art. Wonderful artwork. One of the things that's true of the Midas Saints is they are an infantry defense specialist chapter. That's their ideal type of engagement. Because of that, they obviously have tanks, right? But because of that, their tankmanship, if that's even a real word, is not as masterful as other chapters. And even if it were, their access to siege tanks is considerably less so. But that doesn't mean they are without those things. If they need to lay siege to somewhere, they'll bloody well do it. They're just not going to do it as well as the Imperial Fists,
For sure.
or whoever else, right? So just remember, it's all about give and take. I know we said this before, but it's all about give and take. Find that balance, because the balance, it's not just a left and a right or an up and a down. This balance is omnidirectional,
Definitely.
And there's always room for changing and, having fun with it.
I completely agree with that. I think, for me personally, I go about it mostly from a quite literal standpoint. So, usually the way I see, what my homebrews have available to them is what I have it in forms of miniatures. I know this is a weird way to look at it, and I know it's not everyone is going to be have that availability. It works for me because it helps me really visualize it. But something that I think is really funny to do is you don't need to necessarily think about it in the grand scale. I personally love to go down into the smaller, minute, weirder details. For example, my Iron Gorgers have these absolute monstrosities of rifles, of bolter rifles, that they've slammed together many different pieces of weaponry to create these super weird bolter variants that are weird. And they literally just came to be because when I was building my Marines, I saw oh, what the fuck, why can I only have why can I not have the scope if I want the heavy rounds? And I just fucking glued on the scope anyway in a half weird position. And I was like, man, but I also kind of want just the regular magazine, and I just cut off a bit and slammed it on the side of the bolter rifle, and now I have this weird heavy fucking it's a varied weapon, and I think that also tells a lot about the storytelling aspect of the chapter itself, in that they just go fucking just smash these fucking things together into this weird fucking hodgepodge of a thing and see where it goes.
Yeah, I mean, you walk across a very thin line with that.
Yeah.
Because invention is dead. Mm-hmm. Unless you're Belisarius Call.
Yep.
Unless you're Belisarius Call, then invention is fucking all the rage. But invention is dead in 40k. It has been for 10,000 years. And so when you create something entirely new like that, there is always going to be, as you've described it, there is always going to be that level of hodgepodge. This isn't quite meant to be. We've forced it to be out of a degree of necessity. All that rhymes. I'm Dr. Seuss. So there's, so you've got to really think long and hard about where you're going to take your wins and losses with this, because it's all well and good turning up and saying, "Hi, here's my chapter. They have this very special variety of tank that no one's got, and it's this. I'm going to negativity again. Oh, I am.
Well, self-realization.
Zarek, save me from making a negative point.
Armoury. Here, another thing about your armoury that you should consider is how your chapter uses it, because if they do have a shortage of something, do they use it out of necessity? Or do they make a relic of it, and do they use it repeatedly because this is their best thing? This is one they have one of, and they may as well use it because it's all they've got. I think
that's also... Sorry.
I was just going to say, that will just say a lot about your chapter. Are they willing to expend their resources, or are they fearful of losing out? Are they stingy? No, go ahead, sorry.
No worries. Maybe it's not necessarily part of the armory, but you just mentioned relics. I think that's also something that is maybe something you need to should take into consideration when doing it. That, like, what relics does your chapter have, and what story or personality do they infer onto your chapter?
Mm-hmm. God, relics could be a whole other segment. Oh my god.
Oh yeah.
Like, they'll be as unique as a marine.
Even more so in some cases, because a good chapter relic will be the oldest thing in your chapter, or older than everything but the other relics. Isn't that fun? Bjorn has ascended to the state of relic.
Oh my god.
But this is the thing, right? About relics, they are so definitive. A relic could not only take up its own whole point. We could make a whole video, a whole podcast episode surrounding relics and the handling of relics. What's a good relic? What's a bad relic? What makes a relic good? What makes a relic bad? Is it bad because it's been written poorly, or is it bad because it's just not very helpful, but it's a relic nonetheless because it's old as fuck?
I think those things are interesting as fuck. Like, still, I mean, why would the chapter hold on to, like, a weird little bauble? Like, what does the bauble mean to the chapter itself?
No one in the Black Templars has opened the bauble of ancient growings in 10,000 years until today, when Brother Sergeant Bigus Dingus opened up the bauble of ancient growings and found that it actually had Rogel Dawn's toenails inside. Unsure of what to do with them, he immediately ate them.
A midnight snack.
And that's how he became Primaris.
That's how he became Primaris. To become Primaris, you have to sit in a room alone with fucking Rabute Gilliman and Belisarius Call. No one knows what happens. All you see when you open the door is either of them sat up either side and this single wooden chair in the middle. An assortment of dildos scattered across the wall.
Hey, yo.
What if it was called Freak Hammer and they were...
God damn it.
I don't hate Primaris, I really don't, but it was handled a little bit... It was handled a little bit on the silly.
Yeah, it was not the best.
I like a lot of Primaris. I really like. It's just, it was.
It took me 5 years to warm up to Primaris.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fucking brutal. That's
I really
actually
didn't like
brutal.
them for the longest time. It was they all look the same. That was my issue.
What was the thing that made you change your mind to actually think they're okay now?
I got bored of being angry.
I got bored of being angry. You didn't warm up to Primaris. You just got bored of being resentful.
Yeah,
of them.
honestly, yes.
No love for the what are they called? The Desolation Marines.
Tom, I think you should consider baking yourself.
like baked beans.
Yeah, I shouldn't have brought that. I shouldn't have brought it up.
I've got a whole second recipe.
I will wrap you in a sheepskin and put you in a skillet.
Okie dokie. That is the most Scottish threat I have ever been subjected to.
Speaking of Scottish things, how about that next point?
Channeling fucking William Wallace over here. So, point number 11. Number 11. So this one is actually a really simple one. We might get through this one quite quickly, but there could be some sub-discussion here. And so that is number 11. Integrate a regional dialect or I should say a cultural heritage. So, when you're doing your homebrew, draw inspiration from historical or fictional cultures to create a unique chapter culture, right? Explore the cultural heritage of their recruitment world or worlds without directly copying a real-world civilization. Delve into their language, rituals, or hierarchy that reflects a coherent but original way of life. This is going to give your chapter identity without detracting from the setting. But do be careful, because you want to make sure their cultural heritage and its embodiment don't overshadow that of the Imperiums at large. So it's always going to be, this is a fun thing, there is always going to be a split heritage and culture with your chapter. It's always going to be, it's not going to be quite a battle between the two, between the Imperium and its own thing. Because I think you find if it gets to the point where there is a battle between the two, that's kind of when secession kind of starts. That's when they can no longer gel with one another. But there is fun things here, and this is the most obvious of obvious things, right? Using real world history to influence what you're doing. There's another point we have in a few minutes, in a little bit, about utilizing real world events and stuff to help dictate certain things about your chapter. So much of the setting is based off of real world things, real world archetypes and stereotypes are so prevalent throughout 40k, and you can use those too to your advantage. There's so much space for them, and you can pick and choose as well. The Midas Saints, for example, on screen again. The Midas Saints, for example.
Whoa.
One of the things that's true of the Midas Saints is I know I wanted them to be heavily inspired by ancient Arabic and Bedouin culture. The desert nomads, the conglomeration of Abrahamic religions in the Middle East, that sort of thing. But I also knew that I wanted to retain some of those stereotypical Greco-Roman influences. There's the ancient Greek influences, the kind of things that are extremely prevalent with the Ultramarines, but still at least somewhat mildly present everywhere else. So it's all about mixing and matching what you really like to find something that feels unique at its core, but still gels with what you've got in its originality. For example, the aesthetics of the Midas Saints, you'll see their swords are long swords and straight swords. A lot of the homebrewers I've spoken to said, "Oh yeah, the Midas Saints have a bit of an Arabic inspiration," and they say to me, "Well, why are their swords not shaped like scimitars?" And I would say to them, simply because the straight power sword, to me, is so symptomatic of your everyday Space Marine chapter, your chapter that looks like a real official chapter, your chapter that looks like it belongs in the setting. It's only to me, right? And then they'll say, "Well, what about the White Scars?" Oh, the White Scars are great. But this is how it is for me. This is my way of looking at it and going, here's what makes it feel like it gels for me. So you can pick and choose. One of the things at this point it says on the screen is integrate a regional dialect. Now, this is fun because this actually goes counterintuitive to a point we made 2 weeks ago about kind of, about our 19th point 2 weeks ago, about not changing out every single bit of terminology in your chapter's thing, in your chapter's document or your chapter ranks, etc., because Space Marines do have established ranks. They have these things that we look to and go, okay, here's what this is, yada, 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 that's fine. You can change those. You can. But when you do, just be careful with how you're presenting them. Please don't expect every other homebrewer or any other homebrewer to memorize your new index of words.
Nope.
That being said, like Zarek pointed out last week, it can be very useful in narratives. If you do have that whole index of new terminology, keep it to yourself and flop it out during narrative moments, because an audience is going to have a much easier time understanding that a Space Marine is using a rebrand for the phrase brother captain in a panicked narrative about an oncoming assault where someone needs orders and direction, as opposed to looking through some big old document summarizing your chapter's history and culture, you know? So keep them reserved for narratives. It can add so much. It's why if we look at Space Wolf Codexes, and we see all the wolf boy for wolf man, wolf child sucking on wolf toes, it's a bit silly. But when you're reading a Space Wolf narrative and they're screaming these things at each other, suddenly it falls into place. Suddenly this unique regional dialect and this unique cultural heritage has a much better place in not just in our perspective, but in the narrative and the setting as well. Because the Space Wolves really are kind of fucking ridiculous, aren't they?
I mean, I'm biased, so yes.
But even if you're not super into crafting a dialect with their own terminology and stuff, a really simple way of considering it, because you should absolutely consider it, is the naming conventions for your characters. I'd highly recommend picking a region of the world or a language of the world and seeing the traits of names. There's some really funny stuff with people who are not native English speakers making up names that sound like they're the names of English-speaking people. That's I could not name you one, but I've seen people do that, and it's very, very funny. But that's kind of what you're doing when you make a Space Marine, is you're taking your own understanding of a language and what that sounds like, and making up a name that you think fits that kind of language. And it works, because it's made up and it's not real, and you get to be silly with it. For example, I decided to take the made-up language of French and use that as a basis for how I'd name Space Marines in my chapter. You could even go with those silly little languages that people make up in Discord servers, you know, who like all those fucking language students who just decide to make their own because apparently they've got too much time on their free hands. Massive respect. Base Space Marine chapter on the culture of a constructed language. Genuinely, if you do that, I want to hear about that. I want to hear about that if you do it.
I'm waiting for someone to create a Space Marine chapter based around the language, dialect, pronunciations of Tolkien's elves.
Oh,
that'd be fucking awesome. Although you'd have to play it carefully, but still, that'd be very cool.
Work for Eldar.
I feel like I've seen that before.
The Eldar.
Shut up. What's wrong with the Eldar?
I own like 3,000 points of Eldar. I'm pulled away. But I know what you mean though. Because with again, come back to the Midas Saints. There's those two that Greco-Roman and modern Arabian influences, and so what I'll do is, and it's really easy. It's so easy. Is they will get a first name or a last name that will be inspired by Arabic names, whether it's a real Arabic name or an entirely fictitious Arabic name or Arabic sounding name based on the sort of, influence of that dialect and what we all consider, or what I consider to sound like it may fit. And then it will get a Greek name somewhere as well, that sort of ancient Roman kind of name, whether it's a first name or a surname. So you've got people running around with Arabic first names and Greek surnames, or Greek first names and Arabic surnames in the chapter, and then there's the occasional person who's got one of both, who's got a double first and surname Arabic or a double Greek first and surname, and then you can split this up into other things as well, because the Midas Saints homeworld of Muskan has two two cities on its north and south equator, because the planet is a desert hellscape. The equator is like the fire planet from the Chronicles of Riddick. It's just really bad. But its north and south pole are far enough from the equator's terrible heats that they're actually habitable. And the way I've sort of been playing it is those Arabic names have been descending from the north, and those Greek names have been ascending from the south. And because the Midas Saints only recruit from the nomadic people who live in the in-between, whether they live underground or in caravans or whatever, they'll end up having both. And it'll be quite rare that it'll be one specifically from one or the other. So again, you've got lots of different ways your facets of regional dialect and cultural heritage can spill into relevant everyday parts of your chapter. And again, we haven't talked about combat here at all. Not a word about combat, not a word about killing, not a word about how Space Marines do war, because culture and Space Marine cultures are probably a little bit more relevant to their home world than they are to their combat doctrines in this particular regard of, regard of heritage and regional dialect. It becomes different, though, when it's on a fleet-based chapter, a nomadic chapter. Then we get into the real fun of it, because all your Space Marines are either void-born or stolen from random-ass planets with no real connecting anything except for the cult of the fucking ship.
And that I was waiting for that because, as I mentioned before, my Iron Gorgers, they are nomadic. However, I decided that it would be very funny to completely circumvent the potential aspect of multiple of those like clashing cultures by just having all the children are put into the fucking oven, and when they come out, they're blank slates. That
by the oven, he means the indoctrination back to tanks, not an actual, nothing too politically spicy.
I didn't even. Whoa! No. Yes, they just come out as blank slates to be molded as the chapter wishes.
And that's just how it goes. And that's a really good way of doing it, because, again, it's actually contributing to this notion that their objective is not just to indoctrinate them into their own culture, but it is to annihilate whatever culture they may have arisen from.
Yeah.
It's a very fun and curious way of going about it.
Well, I think most importantly, for me at least, it plays into the theme of the chapter in its entirety, aka the loss of humanity and the loss of childhood.
Right, shall we talk about point number 12?
Let's go.
Yes.
So, point number 12. Explore your chapter's failures and losses. So, failures and losses really define a chapter as much as their victories, and exploring these darker moments can add depth and complexity to their lore. Perhaps your chapter suffered a catastrophic defeat during a vital campaign, such as losing an entire company to a chaos insurrection or failing to protect a critical Imperial world from a Xenos devastation. These losses can leave lasting scars, shaping a chapter's future strategies, fostering bitterness or guilt within its leadership, and influencing their relations with other Imperial forces. By focusing on their moments of vulnerability. This is a good word for this, vulnerability, because no one ever associates vulnerability with Space Marines. You can create a more grounded and relatable chapter with these moments, contributing to individual or chapter-wide character development that will make their eventual triumphs feel far more earned. How often do you guys read a homebrew and you get to their notable campaign section and you're reading about their victories and losses, right? But because the victories are, is it pronounced Pyrrhic or Pyrrhic? Pyrrhic. Because their victories are Pyrrhic, because their losses are Pyrrhic and their victories are strong and true, it doesn't feel like much is particularly hard earned. But when I read a chapter like the Lamenters, who are constantly in the ringer, when they do finally do something that has any modicum of success, it's so much more satisfying. A chapter that is always winning. It's like conflict, right? Because conflict, much as we said before, conflict breeds interest. If your chapter is always winning or predominantly winning, or is just not losing in any real capacity, their victories are hollow. there was never any stakes to work with, right? So always look towards your chapter's losses, because much like your chapter's weaknesses, failure and loss is positive characterization adding depth. Yeah?
Yeah.
I think losing is the secret sauce to making people like your homebrew. I remember pitching mine to Red, and as soon as I started talking about all the ways in which they'd get the shit beaten out of them by other organizations of Space Marines because they're so fixated on fighting alone, immediately we had way more fun because we'd joke about situations or scenarios where they're losing bad and they're taking it bad, and because it's bad, it's inherently a sort of I want to root for you, little dude sort of story. It goes badly for them, but in that it can also go badly for whoever's inflicted this on them. The particular story I think that came up was a single Marine's ship being raided because he'd gone out for a lone crusade attended by many serfs. And when he's raided by renegade pirates, they ransack the ship. They can't find any Marines. They're going really cautiously because they think there's about to be a stealth ambush, and they just find him in the arming chamber, ready to. And he shouts a duel at them. They just gun him down. They spend his time going around trying to figure out what the fuck, what's going on. And then the reactors blow off because the crew decided, fuck this, we're all dying, and they jettisoned themselves after sending the reactors into critical. That's
fucking great.
And a story like that is not going to be a good, like, fun loss to read about. Like Tom was saying, that's a for the enemy that was a Pyrrhic victory because they lost more. But as an example, losing all the time is way more fun and way more funny. If you think about the chapters that the Warhammer community loves, if you think about the like Tom was saying, the Lamenters, if you think about the Scythes of the Emperor, these are and the Crimson Fists, all these chapters, people love them so much, especially compared to the Ultramarines, and it's because they get their shit pushed in, and it goes badly for them, and then they get a rival that they want to fight back against, and when they get to do that, you're rooting for them, because you've seen them at their worst, and you want to see them succeed. With the Ultramarines, it falls into that trap of, does it really feel earned when Marneus Calgar picked up that pylon and threw it around? That's one of those things you've got to be aware of. And, even if you do it, it's fine. GW does it too. But it's an instant trick to make people like your homebrew. Is let them get their shit pushed in. Genuinely.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a case of more than not. Right, you can characterize it quite well with like 1 to 3 battles. Maybe one has their most recent battle. Maybe it was only one battle and it happened 5,000 years ago. But you can characterize it quite easily by creating a battle that they didn't just lose, but they lost a part of themselves doing it. And I'm not just talking numbers. I'm talking a shame upon their honor. An actual breaking, an actual losing, an actual loss worthy of a loss worthy of remembrance. Because those are the ones that are going to create character and chapter-wide motivations going into the future. If someone says to me that their chapter hates, the Drakari because the Drakari are evil and they torture people, I sleep. But if somebody says that they hate the Drakari because fucking 2 companies got sucked into Comora and were never fucking heard of again, real shit,
Sucked off in Comora.
But on the flip side of that, another interesting thing you could do, and this would actually be really interesting if they put this in for Ultramarines, is making it implied that the chapter obscures its losses. Of course, that has to be apparent to the reader, so that's going to take some deft writing to make that apparent. But making it clear that they hide their losses would be really funny for someone to realize and make them far more, I think, likable as an anti-hero, almost.
Yeah. Got to be written with a careful hand, though.
Very carefully.
But that's something you'll have, we say this to people, we say this a lot in private conversations in the Discord when people oh my god, since the last episode, I've had so many DMs for homebrew advice. Holy shit. But when I talk to people privately about homebrews, whether it's in the VC and I'm playing video games and someone if I'm in the VC playing video games, which happens like a couple times a week, I'm in there, you can jump in and ask me a question. I don't mind. That's okay. But when people ask me questions, it's sometimes hard because you can suggest something, but the most beneficial skill you can pick up, rather than me suggesting anything, is to just write. And this is why we say don't worry about fucking up, because the more you're writing, the more you're improving. So this idea of writing something that's its losses are characterized by them hiding their losses to someone who can write with an excess of skill, can depict that in a way that maybe we're actually not characterizing the losses. The interesting bit is the fact that they are hiding them. The reason they're hiding their losses is now suddenly way more interesting than the fact that they had any losses in the first place. Even if those losses were terrible or even not bad, it doesn't matter, you know? So really delve into writing, you know? Just write and write. Doesn't matter if it's bad, because eventually it's not going to be bad, you know? And read too. I know we went on and on and on last week about reading reading inspirational stuff, reading Space Marine short stories, yada, yada, yada. But it's true. It's true. You'll improve as a writer. And here's the fun thing as well. We mentioned last week the difference between narrative chapters, state-based chapters, and chapters that mix both. Just to explain now, in case you didn't see last week's, a state-based chapter is a way of presenting a Space Marine chapter that has no narrative involvement. It's like here's bullet points. My chapter is this. They do this. They do this. Here's some characters. Here's what they are like. There's no narrative involvement. A narrative presentation is presenting your chapter in full narrative, right? Full like stories. Here's a long story. Here's a short story. Here's a date, a time, or a potential date and time. And then you've got both, which is most homebrews are little bits of both. Maybe it'll lean more one way, more to the other. Doesn't really matter. But if you're doing a chapter with any kind of narrative aspect, just writing will do loads of work. And if you're doing a chapter that's purely state-based, there's still things you can read that are going to improve your state-based homebrew writing. And it's codexes.
Yep.
You know, we were flapping about which codexes we liked the most before we started this recording. And I was like, you got to get down the 7th edition Blood Angels Codex, because it's gorgeous. It's wonderful. It's a treat, even. You know, whether it's that codex or another codex, you know, the older codexes are fucking hilarious. Rule books, for example, you can learn a lot about state-based stuff by looking at the rule books for the Deathwatch tabletop RPG. You know, there's so much fluff in those to tell you about Space Marines and what they're like. So yeah, just, you know, practice, you know, get comfortable with writing, even if it's state-based, narrative, whatever. Just keep going at it, because you'll get better.
For sure. I also want to touch upon, before we move on, a writing tip that I enjoy, which is when you're writing some kind of let's say, for example, a conflict between A and B, your chapter and their enemies of some sort.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people fall into the trap of thinking that if, for example, your side wins, or if the other side wins, it's always like black or white. It's they won and they lost. But a conflict, a war, people or both sides lose something. And let's take Badab War as an example. I think that is a perfect example of, as well as my next point, which is finding victory in defeat, which is the Huron Blackheart, or Huron lost, quote unquote, but he retreated into the Maelstrom and became the biggest, baddest motherfucker there is.
Yeah.
There's a victory in the defeat, and that's something that I think is important to remember. It's the same for the Imperium in that case. They lost they beat back this immense enemy, but then they also gained a new more powerful enemy.
Well, this comes back to when I was talking about Pyrrhic victories and Pyrrhic losses, because even though before I was advising against them, if you handle the narrative with a degree of nuance, when we're talking about the effects of these victories or the effects of these losses, you can still get grand character development, whether it's the character or the chapter. You can still get grand amounts of development out of them.
Yeah, absolutely. An example I have done of this myself is my Chaos Warband, which I want to say they sort of won after they purged the loyalist elements out of their chapter and then decided to fuck off into flee somewhere. They decided they were going to flee into the warp. And just as they do, the Cicatrix Meloditum opens and they find themselves stuck in the warp for what them seems a very long time. And they come out completely fucked up. It's a victory turned into a defeat sort of deal.
Yeah.
But it's a change. It's not a permanent defeat that kills them or cripples them in a sort of way. It's development. It's development. It leads to change.
One last thing I do want to say about defeats is that they are a brilliant gateway to introducing a running villain in your chapter's history or a running vendetta. Every single vendetta you see in 40k is almost always inspired by a defeat or victory on one side, with the most classic probably being the Thousand Suns and the Space Wolves. Simply being that the Space Wolves beat the shit out of the Thousand Suns, cast them away, and almost slaughtered them to the man. And returning from that, during the War of the Fang, the Thousand Suns wreaked a bloody tally on them. And so in turn, they've gained a mutual hatred, even though there was already animosity there. And it takes a defeat to gain that and to make that hatred worthy. That's a great thing for your chapter to have, is to be humbled and not to grow and become more humble as individuals, but instead, for Space Marines, it's to get more angry and more indignant. That's what you want to see.
Be unruly in your violent ignorance. Your inability to empathize with another man must resort to greater heights of violence and rejection of conflict resolution.
And it will escalate until one of the two is destroyed. And it doesn't always have to be the villain that's destroyed.
No, it doesn't. This comes back to what we were talking about earlier. Yeah, it can be you. It can be you, and it can always get worse. You can always just keep adding and adding and adding and adding to it. It could be you, Zarek. I'm sorry.
It could be any one of us. could be anyone in this room.
Right, shall we move on to the next one?
Let's go.
I think we can get through this next one quite quickly, just because we've already touched on it a little bit, but I want to mention it anyway. So, number 13. Use historical wars as inspiration for battle tactics and notable conflicts. Base the chapter's combat style, or you can base the chapter's combat style on an underused historical warfare tactic. Avoid standard shock assaults or siege warfare, and instead actually go out of your way to research, niche military approaches such as Fabian tactics, trench warfare, long-term guerrilla campaigns. Mountains of 40k is based on real-world historical conflicts. This is a great way to find amazing reference material that gels well with the setting's established tones, because the setting is kind of, or at least one point in time, was a mockery of what's real. I don't know if there's too much to expand on this. Do either of you guys have anything about this you want to talk about?
No, I think it's a good point, and remember that you can take it from there's multiple points of history. A lot of people I think get stuck in more ancient times, say Vikings, samurais, things like that. But there's a wide variety of eras to explore and take from. For example, you can learn from our glorious leader, Gustavus Adolphus II. Swedish lore, there you go.
Yeah, you got some Swedish propaganda.
The father of modern warfare. There you go.
I've just got a wee bit to say there also, is that even with those ancient kinds of warfare, that's still warfare, and if you want to make an allegory of it into sci-fi, 40k is the perfect setting for that. Or hell, even taking like your favorite fantasy military that employs magicians and stuff, you can then take that into 40k. If you want to look at the dynamics of tribal warfare among Amazonian tribes, that would be a really interesting thing to be represented as a warfare tactic.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't have to be the modern incarnation of warfare. All stages of warfare are valid because in 40k, they live in the Dark Ages.
Yeah. Right, shall we shimmy on to the next one?
Shimmy, shimmy on.
So this next one is a little bit interesting. It's a bit obvious, but I think it has more nuance than people give it credit for. And that's point number 14. Define your chapter's allies within the Imperium. So, when defining your chapter's allies within the Imperium, consider both practical and thematic connections, rather than simply allying with common institutions like the Adeptus Mechanicus or the Inquisition. Yeah. Delve into more specialized relationships. What the hell was that?
You got scared by a bird.
Did you catch that? Oh, that was spooky. So, perhaps the chapter maintains a close bond with a particular Imperial Navy fleet. Perhaps this is something that is, done because your chapter is very much a fleet-based chapter with lots of void warfare, regularly coordinating void-born campaigns together. Or they might have a rare but trusted rapport with the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, relying on sanctioned psychics to help them navigate treacherous warp routes, creating a force of Astartes that can go places that others not necessarily could, or a long-standing alliance with a specific rogue trader dynasty, for instance, could provide them with access to maybe slightly more exotic resources or uncharted battlefields, whilst helping shape their, identity within the Imperium. Such relationships not only enrich your chapter's background, but will also deepen their role within the larger sort of imperial war machine.
To take it the alternative way, something also to think about is what other factions in the Imperium have encountered your chapter and how they regard them. There's plenty of jokes about the reaction of an Imperial Guard soldier who has to work alongside the Marines Malevolent. That's something you should consider, is how notorious is your chapter? Are they known for being great allies to the average Imperial general? Or are they known for getting in the way or not announcing themselves before they make a drop pod assault right onto the target that their Imperial Guard is shelling?
Yeah.
The way that they interact with others isn't just in an ally sense. It's what kind of allies are they to them, even if they don't necessarily get along. Perhaps your chapter shares a system with a fairly prominent guard regiment because there's a hive world there that raises so many people. And your chapter may not have the highest esteem of mortals, but perhaps they've simply just learned to work with them out of a pragmatism born of proximity, just because they're there. There's so many ways you could take this, but that's going to be through stories and events that they go through.
And you mentioned like pragmatism, like for example, like the number of Marines you have, and for example, or just their way of combat dictates probably as well, what people or what factions they fight with themselves, or how much they take help from people. If your Marines are specialized in more surgical strikes, for example, and don't rely super heavily on those big battles we talked about, then they would probably very happily take help from that guard regiment or that fucking Adeptus Mechanicus army if it helps them achieve their goals in a particular campaign or something.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, perhaps they have a particular appreciation for order and compliance, and so they maybe have a relationship with the Adeptus Arbites.
Yeah.
There's so many cool little Imperial institutions that so rarely get love. I'm pretty sure the Ultramarines would actually have more in common with your average Administratum adept than they would with an Imperial Guardsman sometimes. And that's a really interesting relationship that you can explore.
Absolutely. And I do like that thing that you just said, that there's so many wonderful little organizations within the Imperium that don't get enough love. And we can ask ourselves as homebrewers, how far does our responsibility stretch to show these organizations some love or some intrigue, right? Some, I fear, get way more than they deserve. The Inquisition, as we talked about last week, is used by homebrewers as a narrative beat stick to make things happen. But there's so many more nuanced choices to get things done. Even if it's not a Ordo Majoris, it can be an Ordo Minoris that people haven't really spoken about or talking about. The last couple of days I've been reading about a variety of Ordo Minoris, or Minori, or Minorises that have like brought up a ton of interest in me. There's the Ordo, I think it's called the Ordo Necros, and it doesn't have anything to do with the Necrons. The objective of the Ordo Necros is totally unknown.
Ooh.
And then here's a fun one. There's the Ordo Vigilus. Do you know what their job is?
To watch?
It's to watch over the Ordo Necros.
Fucking hell.
You got it's the blind leading the fucking blind. And this is the thing, we a lot of homebrewers, and I've been guilty of this in the past. I'm not, again, we're not infallible here. We've all made mistakes, because making mistakes is important to making homebrews. But I do believe on this particular topic, the 3 major inquisitorial ordos have been beaten to death.
Oh, God, yeah.
It's like, I don't want to, oh man, I'm being negative again, but, I'm going to roll this one through, because I think this one is fair and deserved. No one likes it when the Inquisition turns up, not your Space Marines, not no one. They carry with them the authority of the Golden Throne, and when they rock up, it's not good. But there are, just to take it back to a more positive place, there are so many tiny little random institutions in 40k. There's some really cool ones actually in 30k as well. I know I'm going to take it to a weird place, but if you wanted to homebrew Black Shields, for example, there's tons of random little things that existed during 30k that don't exist anymore. That would be very cool to connect Black Shield forces to. Like, I was reading recently on the Saturnine Ordos.
Oh.
The Saturnine Ordos with the template, the gold standard for the Solar Auxilia, and they had these very flamboyant and cocky generals. It's very cool. It's this tiny little thing, and 40k has stuff like that as well, and it's one of the points we said at the start of this point was the idea that if you are a Voidborn chapter, if you're a Fleet Warfare chapter, and your chapter's whole shtick is breaking into enemy vessels and shooting them in the face, GTA style, you may find that certain Imperial Navy officers will be really good with you. But yeah, it's a really fun one. It's a really good one to spend some time exploring who your chapter allies with, because then you can explore those as if they're your homebrew as well, because you're not really going to turn up and say, my chapter master is good friends with Creed, whether it's Creed 1 or Creed 2. You're not going to do that. But what you can do is create your own general, your own Navy commander, your own whoever, and that can be your port of call, if you will, to connect your chapter to them.
If I may provide an example, Tom, I can dip into my own little homebrew. The Knights of the Blanched Hollow care very deeply about Imperial propaganda. And this is because, as solo operatives who are attended to by mortal followers, they also tend to pick up artists, the sort of people that might have at one time, say 10,000 years ago, been considered remembrancers. And these people recall their deeds in a overly flowery and maybe not the most accurate language. And this allows the chapter to have a very nice relationship with the Imperial propaganda machine. And this has its benefits. The Administratum really likes you. What's that? You want, like, a whole bunch of power swords? Yeah, sure. Keep sending us these cool recordings, and we'll send you some. It's not out of the question, but it can.
Well, the Imperium at large has an ego, an ever-feeding ego as well. It's very nice that you've touched on that, because I don't think many people really acknowledge that.
It's huge. The Imperium will dedicate so many resources to aggrandizing itself to its own glory. If your chapter is good friends with, say, the ecclesiarchy, the ecclesiarchy is very powerful, very wealthy, and it doesn't actually get taxed in the same way that the rest of the Imperium does. And if they're around there helping defend shrine worlds, they might get some relics in return. That's a fun wee gimmick.
Yeah, that's really cool. I love that. Do you have anything you want to go off on this point, Moots, or shall we move on to the next one?
No, I think we can move on.
So, this next one was a suggestion of mine, and I really, really like this one. So, point number 15. This is going way off topic. No one's gonna be expecting.
Number 15.
Point number 15. An alternative color scheme for your first company. Designing an alternative color scheme for the first company can be genuinely very rewarding. It's a fun and creative exercise that allows you to explore unique visual contrasts while still adhering to your chapter's established identity. Traditionally, many chapters have their veterans or terminators don different armor, often white, black, or bone, to signify rank or experience, and experimenting with these and other colors, or creating your own entirely unique veteran scheme can reinforce the elite status of the first company while offering a striking aesthetic on the battlefield. But not just that, it opens up a very refreshing hobby sort of opportunity for personalizing models using alternative heraldry, adding specialized iconography that can further highlight their revered status within the chapter. It's really good. I think that the simplest way to look at it, I would say, is you've got your chapter, you've got your color scheme. Imagine you had the opportunity to come up with an alternative color scheme for your chapter that still had some reliance on the original color scheme. I don't have any images of this to put on the screen, but my chapter, as you've probably seen if you've been watching the screen when I mentioned the Midas Saints throughout this video, are predominantly gold, with one silver arm and that magenta chapter badge, right? The alternative color scheme I have for them changes the silver arm for gold and the gold armor for magenta. So when these two forces sit side by side on the battlefield, they gel as one cohesive unit. But as a hobbyist and as a painter and as a homebrewer, I get this really fun, refreshing, and unique experience to say, hey, here's a totally distinct paint job with some elements of the original, but is still contributing to the original force, the greater project. And I think that's the death of a lot of homebrews, a lot of Space Marine homebrews, especially from a modeling standpoint. The repetitiveness of them. And this is a really good way to break that.
I completely agree with that. And it's funny that you mentioned this because when we were talking about these points, when we were making the list, this was one of those points that really hit me. I was like, man, I hadn't thought about this at all, but it's such a super fun little niche way to cram some extra juice of creativity out of you, and it's really put like put on a thinking hat, because now I gotta think of something for my first company.
And what you'll want to do is you're going to sit there and you're going to want it to complement your other color scheme. You're going to look at what makes your other color scheme special, and you're going to be thinking, okay, well, I want to do these colors, but is this going to look good stood next to my other guys? And you're going to have this whole extra layer of challenge that you never realized was there before. It's great. I really recommend it, because do you know what gave me the inspiration?
What's that?
Just the Deathwing.
Oh.
Just the Deathwing, because the Dark Angel's Deathwing, I mean, obviously I'm not going to make my homebrew with only Terminators because I'm not that guy. But the Deathwing have this totally bone color scheme, and then you've got the Ravenwing, which have this total black color scheme, and then you've got the Greenwing, which is companies 3 through 10, which are just the green Dark Angels that we all know and love.
Love is a strong word, but you know.
Well, maybe if you're not you or Red, sure. I know you guys don't fucking, you know. But it's a really fun one because there are law precedents for it, and unless your chapter is the Crayon Eaters and you're doing the Crayon Eaters #2 as your first company, it's like it'll always be okay. The only advice I would give is just try and make sure that in your own mind they have some thematic elements that draw comparison to the other paint job, the primary paint job for your chapter's color scheme.
For sure.
Another thing to consider off the back of this, like Tom was saying, the Dark Angels have the Deathwing and the Ravenwing, which both have distinct color schemes. Now, I wouldn't recommend going this far, but every company, generally, tends to have their own specific company markings. And according to the Codex, that means a different color of shoulder banding. But every chapter does it differently. And so seriously considering how your chapter denotes companies and squads is a really good opportunity to make cool little divisions and distinctions within your Marines. You know, what does the color of green mean within this context? And there's some really fun variation that you get the chance to do.
Yeah. You can also go as far as give each individual company their own motto, because each company has, well, to a certain degree, it is a sort of miniature version of your chapter. These companies can have their own culture, in a sense, a variation of your culture, their own characters, their own personalities that drive the certain company. You know, I trying to think in the same way where you're thinking in a bit smaller details, because again, a chapter can be pretty overwhelming as well. Fucking go down to just the word that I've forgotten, the company, or even do a sub company. That's something that also happens, and just have fun with those little things.
Yeah, one of the things on a similar topic that you can do, and I'll put on the screen now behind me. This is my chapter structure page for my codex. And one of the things you can choose to do on the similar topic to what you've just said, this is nothing about the color scheme, but it's the best bounce off point for this. And that's that your companies can have specific specializations. Now, I do believe for my chapter in doing codex compliancy. I like my 1 to 5 being my battle companies, and 6 to 10 being my reserve companies. And so for me, doing different things between them was a matter of working out how the battle companies and the reserve companies were characterized as battle and reserve companies, whilst also having unique elements between them. And so you can see here, I'm going to assume on the screen behind me right now is the company sections from 1 to 10, that the first company, the Brothers Auric, is called the Spear of Midas. Right. Sorry, that's the chapter. Sorry, it's called the Brothers. That's the captain's title. It's called the Brothers Auric, and that's the Brothers Auric, the Brothers Gold, the gold standard, the best of the best. The June Lords, the second company, you can see that they're characterized by bikes and speeders, so lots of fast attack. The Bastion Born, lots of dreadnoughts. The Shield of Midas is that what their captain is called. You know, so big rock up defender big rock up defender bastion kind of thing. The Scourge of the Hedonists, the Demon Hunters, the Sentinels of Humanity, the characterization of my chapter's love for humanity, right? And then we come to 6 through 10. The reserve companies, right? The Wardens of Muskan, the company that is always stationed on the homeworld. The Heart Watchers, so these are the guys that support to help with civilian and militarum relief efforts. The Fraternity of Fire, the captain is called the Hammer of Midas, and the Fraternity of Fire is the big sort of fire support company with lots of fire support squads, battle tanks, dreadnoughts, speeders. You know, these are the guys, you know, like I said earlier in the recording, my chapter would struggle compared to a lot of other chapters to do siege warfare, but if they needed to, then this reserve company in tandem with one of the battle companies would be the ones to try and make it happen. And then we've got the Martyr's Eyes, the Master of Winds, the sort of the snipers sort of company, this sort of scouts company. Oh, sorry, the next one is actually the scouts company, the Gauntlet Warriors. You know, these guys are here to survive the gauntlet of being neophytes and scouts to actually become Space Marines, and so you can actually split up the. Maybe this deserved its whole own point, to be honest. The idea that your individual companies can have individual roles. And like you can see I've done here, I found ways of keeping it Codex compliant between the 10 whole companies, 5 battle, 5 reserve, but still having their roles fit battle roles and reserve roles, It's all doable. And if you want to, whilst we're still talking, this is actually, I've got to talk about it, this chapter structure page is based off of the 7th edition Blood Angels Codex structure page. It took me ages to mimic it and create it, but I love it. I think it's a great little thing to do. If you've got any Photoshop experience, or someone who does, and you want to put something like this together, it's a really rewarding thing to do, to put together and understand your chapter a little bit better, give them that officialness, This is why, I in these last 2 recordings, I've quote-unquote chatted a lot of shit about state-based chapters, right? And how I was talking about how narrative stuff is way better, yada yada. This here is the power of doing a state-based chapter, because you can do stuff like this. And it really gives them that official feel, that feeling that they're a real Space Marine force. Right, does anyone have any more talking points for this point 15, or shall I move on?
I don't.
Not me.
So, point number 16. Collaborate with other homebrews. This one's great.
Fun.
So, collaborating with other homebrewers offers a unique narrative opportunity to expand your Space Marine chapter's lore in either unexpected or exciting ways, by working together, you can create joint narratives, shared histories, and even rivalries that add depth and richness to both of your creations, whether it's fighting alongside each other on a long-standing campaign or a single battle, or standing opposed in a bitter centuries-long feud. This collaborative process brings a dynamic sense of realism to your homebrew. Plus, sharing creative ideas and developing interconnected stories can spark new inspirations, making whole experiences more fun and engaging as you collectively build upon and from each other's lore. That picture of the Midas Saints I showed earlier with all the Tyranids, those Tyranids are Aaron's homebrew. Our resident Death Guard, who's got a Death Guard army, a Salamander's army, and a Tyranid army. That's my guys facing off against his Tyranids, so that both of us can have some narrative engagement together. It's a really, really great thing to do, and it's the best way to engage in another person's homebrew, because if you give me your whole ass fucking Knights of the Blanched Hollow document, Zarek, because you're my friend and I know you write well, I'm going to give it a whole lot of interest. I'm going to give it a whole lot of reading. But if we go with a joint campaign together, like we're doing in Deathwatch with our Deathwatch characters, and then you give me your homebrew, suddenly I care so much more because I'm now involved in this. I'm going to have a stake in this. It's such a. If you care about homebrewing and you've got peers who care about homebrewing, it is such a gift you can give to them to allow them the right to shape in small parts your homebrew. And vice versa.
Tom, is this your way of asking me to put together like a full document finally?
I would like to read it.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind.
If you do it, I'd like to read it. I definitely won't post it on the podcast and read it out live and call it the Judgment of Zarek in the title.
Well, that is great, because then I put you in a sheep somewhere and carry you in a skillet.
Apologies.
I think this is a very important point as well, because at least for me, I find this to be the most rewarding part of homebrewing, because this is essentially how I got into homebrewing, for starters, because I saw a bunch of, like when I started a long time ago, I saw a bunch of homebrewers like doing this collaborative campaign together. They had this big story of like, I think it was like 5 or 6 different homebrews that like where their characters came together and like did a bunch of stuff, and I thought, man, this is so cool. It's like it's a sort of Avengers comes together moment, if you want to be real fucking nerdy about it, but I'm a comic book nerd, so I can get away with it. It's but that's really what sold it on me. And And now I haven't done it as much as maybe I would have liked, but it gave me the perfect opportunity to throw myself into the world of homebrewing and set my guys against or with others and see how it shapes the chapter in itself. For those who were maybe have vigilant eyes, maybe noticed that on the little presentation card for my Iron Gorgers, there's this little there's a little symbol there that you might recognize, and that's a campaign badge that the second company of the Iron Gorgers, some other companies as well, took part of in a campaign for something that me and Tom would call then the Greenskin Annihilation Wars of Thrace, and which was a huge deal for the Midas Saints, because this is where they became the Midas Saints, and for the Iron Gorgers to put this symbol there is a badge of huge honor between the chapters, because this represents so much to the Midas Saints and means a lot for the Iron Gorgers as well, because they really appreciate the Midas Saints, and for them, maybe they have a different view on the change that the Midas Saints went through during that campaign, but they really respect the change, the transformation, the going from one step to the next, and it's those sort of like cool little things. Like, I mean, you wrote that whole fucking thing, and I read it, and I fucking loved it, and I reference it in the way that in a small but I think still meaningful way, which tells a lot about the chapter, their story, their culture, their friendships.
Yeah, well, it's a fun one. Just a context for the audience, real quick. That transformation, the Midas Saints. I won't daddle. I won't dilly daddle. I won't
Stop
p diddy on this too much.
Whoa!
But the Midas Saints in M37, alongside the Iron Gorgers and a few other chapters. This was part of a homebrew thing. Basically had to defend Thrace from an enormous greenskin war that almost annihilated a number of chapters, and billions and billions of people died. They were eventually successful, but there was a bit of a MacGuffin kind of moment that happened, and one thing led to another, yada yada, and a very important member of the chapter, and the chapter at the time was called the Auric Brotherhood. A very important member of the Auric Brotherhood had to sacrifice himself. His name was Sortirus Midas. And when Sortirus Midas sacrificed himself, which basically was the final closing act of the campaign and brought it all to a close, and at least for that period in time, kept the Thrace sector safe, it was mythologized by the chapter, and it was this huge deal for them. And so the whole chapter basically redid its entire cult and creed in reverence of this one act of sacrifice. That's why the chapter's unofficial unofficial title is The Inheritors of the Martyr, because he martyred himself. And so I come back to what Moots was saying about the Iron Gorgers as beings who are very technologically minded and who have that sort of, I don't want to say flesh is weak mentality, but certainly they sort of have that machine metamorphosis going on. Mm-hmm. It doesn't just extend to just machines. It's that transformation, the changing, evolving of oneself. And so the chapter doing this one giant event and changing to become the Midas Saints from the Auric Brotherhood, this great noble transformation, was something that the Iron Gorgers were able to look at and go, yes, this is respectable. We've just spent 7-8 years fighting this long campaign together, and now you've evolved, and we respect that evolution. So and this is what we mean about this whole point of collaborating with other homebrewers, because both of us have had a long narrative engagement that has impacted both of us positively and is now going to live with our respective chapters in eternum. And that's what you want. That's what you want out of other people's homebrews. The honor that it is to have your chapter's badge hung as a joint campaign badge in a totally separate homebrew from your own that someone you know and respect has dedicated hours and hours to. It's a really transcendent honor that extends beyond just the narratives you're creating, you know? It's a really heartfelt and soulful thing you can do. So I definitely recommend doing that, you know? Engage with your peers' homebrews. Get them to engage with yours. Find out what makes both of them feel good and special and unique, and play together. You know, don't just play the tabletop together. You don't have to play the tabletop together, but write together. Write narratives together, back and forth bullet points and campaign bits. Brainstorm, have fun with it, go nuts. You know, because even if you want to ignore all the stuff from the last episode where we talked about things not to do, and you want to ignore what's canon, you can still say you're canon to each other. Mm-hmm. And that little world, that little galaxy is yours entirely. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a wonderful thing to have.
But one last thing to say, and it's for people whose friends in their local group don't really like to homebrew much, because I know that's me. I've got friends, they'll maybe do basic background for their warlord, but not much else. If that's you, this message is specifically for you. I want you to lock in right now. I've got some advice for you. Take your games that you play and discard most of them. But pay attention to the ones that have the most fun moments. The games that are close, or the ones where something absolutely mental happens. Take it and adapt it into a tangible story for yourself. I know in my local Crusade games, there's been a lot of games that nothing interesting will happen that much. 10th edition. But sometimes there will be absolutely brilliant moments. In fact, a friend of mine, she was starting off her Leagues of Votan army, and we were just playing. It was wasn't even in a Crusade campaign. This was just we were playing a random little combat patrol game, and I had an absolute horde of Tyranids, and she was still wondering, all right, how am I going to do what I want with these guys? Because I know I want to turn them into essentially chaos, like Cornate kindred, is what she wanted to do. Take them in that direction. What ended up happening is that the massive horde of Tyranids got bogged down in combat with them for the rest of the game. And so the game devolved into a bunch of dwarves punching bugs in the face and bugs slowly eating them all. We had one moment where her Thunderkin, the big guys with heavy weapons, were stood at the top of a building, and they were shooting down, and then suddenly the Hormagaunts get up, and because of how spindly, because I've got the old ones, because of how spindly those old models are, I genuinely had them with their arms like sticking out of the windows and crawling up the walls all around them. And I think that was such a good narrative moment. Yeah. These moments will come along, and when that happens, you take it and you run with it like the wind.
Yeah, absolutely. Abso-fucking-lutely, 100%. Right, shall we move on to the next one?
For sure.
Right, so the next one, number 17. Now, this is a really fun one, because I bet a lot of you weren't going to be expecting this. Create non-Space Marine characters.
Oh, yes.
To enrich your Space Marine chapter's lore, consider introducing prominent non-Space Marine characters who play vital roles in their operation, or maybe non-vital roles as well, actually. You know, figures such as the Master of the Fleet, who oversees void engagements and coordinates complex interstellar campaigns, or the chapter's chief navigator, whose deep knowledge of the warp ensures the fleet's safe passage, right? Add layers. These things add layers of realism and depth to the chapter's structure. Additionally, leaders among the chapter's serfs or recurring human allies, like an Imperial Guard regiment, like we spoke about earlier, an Imperial Guard regiment commander frequently working alongside the chapter can provide perspectives on the chapter's methods and relationships with the broader Imperium. You know, these non-Astartes characters not only serve practical roles, but also highlight the chapter's reliance on mortal elements, you know, reinforcing the intertwined nature of the Imperium's many arms of power. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. When you talk about non-Space Marine characters within Space Marine stories, when you said people who maybe don't serve them in an obvious way, the thing I thought of immediately was Cyrene Valantian from the First Heretic.
Would you like to explain who that character is?
Absolutely. So Cyrene was one of the few, I think it was like she's touted as the sole survivor of the destruction of Monarchia. I'm sorry, guys, I'm not going to go into the background of that. That'll take too long.
That's a good idea.
She's sole survivor of the destruction of Monarchia, and she was kind of taken aboard by the word bearers, and she was treasured as sort of the last jewel of that perfect city. Because they valued her so much, oftentimes Marines would come to visit her, and they would tell her of the things that they were doing. And over time, she grew to become a confidant of theirs. She was somebody that they trusted, and that she soon became a confessor to. They'd confess things to her, almost. And she even kept secret when they found other gods to worship instead. And she's a really, really brilliant character in that novel, because I'm just looking at the wiki page, and oh my god, the fucking plot I'm seeing unfold. I'm so glad I stopped there.
Hello.
So essentially, she serves as a human that the Astartes are able to speak to and have some kind of empathy from, because of course they lack it from everywhere else. She makes the company that she serves with so much more human, and it's why people like Argol Tal so much, is because we get the most human out of him when he's speaking to her.
Yeah.
And I think that's why non-Space Marine characters can be so important in the context of your chapter. And it's because they can make your Space Marines people again, because they're not on their own.
Yeah. That's a really great way of looking at it as well. And do you know who it's the same for? Grimaldus.
Oh, true.
Grimaldus and...
Andre.
Andre, yes. Captain Andre of the Imperial Guard. What a wonderful little fella. But that's just the way it goes. Actually, I want to point something out. You said you found this out because you were just looking through the wiki. I just want to point out that in response to 2 weeks ago, we said don't trust the wiki too much, because sometimes don't trust even the Lex, because sometimes it's wrong. I'm not going to point out what article we had to change recently, but we did, because it was wrong.
There was a Lex page that it wasn't necessarily even necessarily wrong. It was just a little bit misleading in the way it was worded.
Yeah, see, this is where you can't trust the Lex for everything, because even though it's it'll give you the broad strokes, but this is what I said though, even times it is right, it oversimplifies everything. So use it for broad strokes. Actually, I tell you what you can use the Lex for. You can use it to find books you want to read. I'll tell you what I'm destined to listen to tomorrow. When I'm working tomorrow, I'm going to put the False War audiobook on, because I was reading about Endrid Ha on the Lex, and then I found out he has a 75-minute audiobook, and I'm going to smash that first thing tomorrow morning. Oh god, that's going to be good. Endrid Ha, for anyone who doesn't know, is the World Eater Space Marine turned Black Shield, who was reportedly gene enhanced before he became a Space Marine. So he's even though he's a firstborn during the Horus Heresy, he's bigger than a Primaris. And he's just got this fucking Archaeotech pistol and this Archaeotech power fist, and he's just a one-man fucking army on a mission to kill Horus. It's great. But yeah, so. Unless Moots, you have anything on the non-Space Marine characters?
I don't know. I was having my piss break, so I didn't hear exactly what you guys said.
Oh no, we've cut out the piss break, but we'll let the audience know that you were there on the piss break.
Yes, that's
active pissing.
Best example I can think of is the. Man, I forget what the character is called, but it's actually wonderful. It's Dante's...
Dante's Master Serf.
Master Serf, yes.
Yes, I've forgotten his name as well, but he's the guy who tried out to become a Space Marine, but failed to become a Space Marine. And he talks to Dante about it, and Dante's like, "Oh, you're a noble little fella, ain't you?" And the guy's just like, "Yeah, I like serving you," even though he said something like, "Oh, if I knew I was going to end up becoming the servant of the Dante, I wouldn't have been sad about not becoming a Space Marine."
Yeah,
because being Dante's servant was an even higher honor, even though he's only going to live for a normal lifespan.
Exactly.
Yeah, cute little fella,
and it's a perfect view into how skewed Space Marines are as well, because even though Dante just fucking is way fucking older than this old man. The old man automatically, even for Dante, takes on this father role.
Yeah.
And although me myself, I know this is a point. I know I brought this point up, but it's something that I haven't developed myself for my own chapter, for my own homebrew. It shows just how incredibly vital it can be. Obviously, your Marines don't have to interact with humans in the same way at all, but it can lead to so many interesting points that I would be remiss to not suggest, at least, to create some human characters and put them in your homebrew.
I think that's what Zarek was saying as well, that if nothing else, mortals make incredible narrative tools in Space Marine narratives.
Yeah.
They're absolutely great. Right, shall we move on to the next one? We're at the final stretch now, ladies and gentlemen.
Whoa.
So, number 18. Write short stories.
Do it!
Writing short stories for your Space Marine chapter is a fun and easy way to bring their lore to life. These stories allow you to explore key moments of your chapter's history, whether it's a decisive battle, a personal conflict between characters, or an unusual mission. Short stories give you the freedom to focus on specific aspects of your chapter's identity, their battle tactics, relationships with other factions, their unique cultural quirks. Since short stories are more contained, they're much, much, much easier to manage than a full novel or even just a campaign doc. They provide a great way to experiment with tone, pacing, character development without needing to commit to a longer project. Plus, they're really engaging for readers and a perfect tool for expanding your chapter's lore in bite-sized but impactful narratives, all whilst improving your skills as a writer. Just don't get ChatGPT to do it.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing in favor of a short story is that it's something you can convince a friend to read. If you write a whole novel, let's be honest, even if you're a pretty damn good writer, no one's going to read the full thing. That's going to take so long. That's a lot of effort you're asking of people who want to engage in your chapter. Doing it short, making it quick, something snappy and fun, that's probably the best way that you have to grab someone's attention.
And it's, I mean, if you have a couple of friends to bounce ideas at, I know Tom has sent me multiple times, 1 page, 2 page stories and asked me, hey man, can you just take a look at this, tell me what you think? And it puts a challenge, a narrative challenge on you to make a nice and short and concise story in that short time frame, relatively, and it makes it just super, as you said, super accessible for anyone else to just read, pick up, and see what they think. And we mentioned some 1 or 2 pages now, but I mean, I wouldn't say I'm the greatest writer. I'm more of a concept and character writer than I am narratives, but...
Well, so you lean more on that side of state homebrewing rather than narrative homebrewing.
Yeah, and, you can just write notable events, and I count that as a form of short story as well. It's just a couple of sentences describing events, but done right, it still serves a narrative purpose, and obviously it always counts as a narrative purpose, but it serves you can read it as a satisfying story.
But that's the thing as well. I mean, I'd have a hard time arguing that one paragraph of a notable campaign makes a story, but you can do notable campaigns that are just 3 paragraphs and can become exquisitely, densely compact, tasteful short stories of, hey, because this is the thing, you've done it right when someone asks you to expand upon it, because you basically just giving someone a spoonful of the core of the taste of your chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And like you were saying as well, if you don't want to do short stories because it's not something that you're built for, or you don't like, or whatever, that's all fine. That's not a big deal. It's not a problem. Don't do them. It's okay. I wouldn't worry. But if you are interested in, improving your writing and characterizing your chapter or Space Marines or Space Marine characters in a way that no other way can, short stories are a great way to do it, because they're simple, they are bite-sized, they're easy to consume. Because that's the thing, it's much easier. If you want me to read your homebrew, I'll fucking read it, because I'm an absolute glutton for punishment. But I will have a much easier time reading a short story that summarizes your homebrew's vibe in like a campaign or a character or something than I will reading your entire chapter doc. You know, typically, I mean, some chapter docs are like 4 pages long, and it's like, okay, fine, I'll just read that in like 5 minutes. That's okay. But a short story is a really great way to enrapture something. There is a homebrewer in our Discord called Var, and my first introduction to Var's homebrew was with a beautifully written short story. And now it's like, it doesn't matter what I read about Var's homebrew. I already have a really wholesome and powerful characterization in my mind of what to expect from them, what they're like. It's a really good way of painting a picture. And yeah, the other one's is that cooperative element. You know, it's much easier for someone to read a short story than it is to read a whole chapter doc or a whole novel or a whole campaign sheet. You know, it's just a quick boom. Hey, here you go. This will take you 15 minutes or less. You know, just give it a crack, and then you can give the feedback and the back and forth. And you can be cute and put a mention of their homebrew in there. And they go, oh, that's really nice. Oh, that's so cool. You know, just little things, you know, lots and lots of little things. It's a really great way of doing it. But yeah,
I have
short
one
stories.
request for anyone out there who does decide to write a short story. If you narrate your short story, if you turn it into a short audiobook, I will listen to it. I want you to know that. I will do this. If you make your short story as consumable as possible, you'll get many more eyes on it. That's the surest way to get people more engaged. Make it as consumable as possible.
Yeah.
You heard it here first. Consume.
And then you get the fun challenge as well of learning to present audio content.
No, definitely.
And
which is
you get to add voices to your characters.
Yeah.
Which is really fun. I can tell you, doing these fucking YouTube shorts and all this YouTube content crap, it's a lot of fun. It's a fun skill to have. It's a fun skill to learn. You can be as cringe as you want and still do a smile on your face, because you know you've done something that someone somewhere is going to consume and smile at when they're listening to it. You know, it's always worth doing.
Me, every time I listen back to the first K-Sor short, I go, damn, did I really voice that? Shit.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. It's absolutely fun. Right, shall we move on to point number 19?
Let's go.
So, point number 19. You all know it was coming. It's like the one piece of advice I give to every single homebrewer when they're trying to do something, you know, one chili icon above spicy, and that is the number 19, be vague. Being vague in your writing can be such a powerful tool making 40k lore. It allows for narrative flexibility while avoiding direct contradictions with the established canon. By leaving certain aspects of your chapter's history, motivation, or even action shrouded in mystery, or open to interpretation, you can create a space where unconventional or borderline lore-compliant elements can exist without overtly challenging established lore. This ambiguity is going to give you freedom to explore unique and unorthodox themes, such as mysterious alliances, peculiar traditions, unexplained relics, gene seed mutations, weapons, etc., while maintaining the suspension of disbelief, as the exact details remain undisclosed or speculative. You know, this technique also invites readers to fill in the blanks on their own, fostering intrigue and deeper engagement with your chapter's lore. You know, it's a catch-all to all the problems of, and it's things like if you have a homebrew that is struggling with its lore compliancy, but you've got one or two aspects of it that are like, yeah, I know this isn't lore compliant, but I want to keep these two things, but you still want it to be lore compliant, this is your best way of doing it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, come back to the multiple thousands of Marines thing, right? If you want to have multiple thousands of Marines, you are much more likely to be able to have that if you don't say. If you just, with your short stories and your campaign documents, you can show, not tell, you can show that your Marines are spread all around the sector, all around the segmentum, in a way that, hold up, they're going to need at least 2,000 Marines to be engaging in these conflicts all at the same time. You know, it's without saying, oh, we've got 2,000 Marines so the Inquisition doesn't chase you down for not being the Black Templars or the fucking Space Wolves, you know? So it's a fun one. It's a really fun one. It's great for explaining away. Actually, I'm going to tell you all about someone who jumped into my DMs after we released the last episode. Now, I wasn't going to reply to him because I got so many fucking DMs, but he had such a cool and interesting concept. I don't want to give him away because he hasn't consented to any of this, so I'm not going to give away any specific details. But his chapter had a unique weapon. And he watched the episode and he sent me a message. He's like, listen, Tom, I really want this weapon to be unique to my chapter only. I don't want anyone else to have it. How do I make that happen? And then he gave me a paragraph of what he already had. And what he already had it had a few problems with it. You know, it basically, to make a long story short, its biggest problem was it relied on the notion that his tech marines were smarter than the Adeptus Mechanicus. And it wasn't going to work. And so what we did was we took away his chapter's ability to replicate these weapons and this technology. So now suddenly they don't have the ability to create new weapons. It's a finite resource, and now they become relics. Really cool. We love relics. We became very vague about his chapters. With the vague comes in, we became very vague about his chapter getting a hold of these in the first place. Originally, it was like something that they only got because the chapter master spoke to Rogel Dawn at some point. But now we're being nice and vague with that. You know, the means in which they get away with having them is because they're finite and because they're no longer hiding them from the Adeptus Mechanicus. Because it's the thing, it's really hard to hide your special weapon from the Greater Imperium, because if you're using it, the Imperium will find out about it eventually. The Ordo Astartes will find out, and then the Mechanicus is going to find out. And this is the thing, the Adeptus Mechanicus, if you had like a special weapon or something from the Great Crusade, the Adeptus Mechanicus will kill you for it. They will fucking rock up and they will kill you. And so we had this weapon, and so the idea was we actually went to it again, and we were like, well, actually, how about this instead? How about when they rediscover this weapon, which is now a relic, not something they can just make? They submitted a number of them to Mars, and so now they're totally even with Mars. Mars knows they have it. Mars knows that there's a limited supply of them. Mars knows that they have a couple as well, so that Mars can research them and do the Martian BS. You know, and now we've created a scenario where he has this special weapon for his chapter that only his chapter has, but it's now law compliant because we've engaged with being vague. You know, it's such a powerful tool. It does so much. You know, there were a few law corrections in there as well, but ultimately none of it could have worked if we didn't go, okay, we're going to be vague about that in the first place. So it's a great one. It's a great one. I love doing stuff like that. It was a really fun. I said to him as well when he sent me that message, and after I stayed up all night writing like fucking 6 paragraphs to fix this for him. And I couldn't help but thank him because it was such a fun theory craft. You know, I was sat there at like 1 a.m. I knew I was staying up late. I got this message. I was like, wow, I'm really going to enjoy this. It really piqued my interest. It's really fun. But yeah, has anyone else got anything to say about being vague?
I think just... Sorry, you go, Mitz.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh.
No, go on.
Go on.
No, you first.
All right, then. All right. Well, I was just going to say, vagueness is the lifeblood of 40k, and it always has been. There is not a single book in 40k that doesn't at least have a degree of vagueness. You know, GW refuses to comment on a number of things simply because it's more fun not to. And so beyond just lore compliance, there are so many more reasons to be vague. Do you want to enhance the horror aspect of something, a threat? You know, maybe you're not just doing Marines, maybe you're doing something else. Do you want to make something more horrific? Great. Don't say what it is. Just imply the effects. That anyone who writes SCPs will know that very well. But vagueness is such a beautiful thing. It's everything about the missing Primarchs. It's why the missing Primarchs can be homebrewed, is because they've been made vague for that reason. And you'll find as you keep reading, because remember guys, read the source material, but as you keep reading, you'll find that many things have been left vague just for you, just so that you can put your little thing in that gap. So don't just be vague, but look at where GW has made things vague and take advantage of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is the example I was going to use is actually, funnily enough, going to spring off perfectly off of what you just said. For my Chaos Warband, they've been revisioned a bit now, but the basic idea of them was that I read the story about Kairos Fateweaver getting tossed like a fucking headless chicken into the Well of Eternity. And me and him coming back and reading that story, and I was like, man, that sounds really fucking fun. And that's basically what propelled the whole story for my Chaos Warband, being them doing what they did to with their loyalist brothers, and then deciding, shit, alright, we need to fuck off. They flee into the warp, and through unforeseen circumstances end up in the Well of Eternity. And what happens down there? But they come back, and they've completely changed. And
what happens in the Well of Eternity stays in the Well of Eternity.
You don't want to know what happens in there. Whoa. The things Brother Crayola saw down there changed him forever.
Keep your socks on in the Well of Eternity.
And I think that's a really, a perfect exercise in vagueness, because it's like, GW hasn't said what's down there. I mean, I'm not going to say what's down there, but whatever the fuck it is, it's fucking terrifying, and it changes people, and it makes for some really fun opportunities for me to build characters and kit bash models. So I'm happy.
Oh, here,
absolutely.
If you're curmudgeonly like I can be, and there are bits of the lore that you really are just not a fan of, here's a fun way you can use vagueness. Use vagueness just to cover the hole where that thing of the lore should be. If you don't like a thing, you don't want to have to go down this weird obscure route for a particular thing, just cover it in vagueness. Yeah, explaining everything isn't always the best. I think the Siege of Terra series is probably a good example of that. There are a lot of things that I'll be vaguing away from time to time when I write homebrews.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, shall we move on to number 20?
Number 20.
Probably the most important one of all, one that we've actually touched upon very briefly throughout this entire endeavor.
Indeed.
Right.
The creme de la creme.
The creme de la creme. The number 20. Have fun and make mistakes. In the vast and complex universe of Warhammer 40k, it's important to remember that creativity thrives when you're willing to take risks. Have fun and make mistakes. Not every idea needs to be perfect from the start. Experiment with unconventional concepts. Explore bold new directions. Don't be afraid to push boundaries, even if it means revising along the way. In the grim darkness of the far future, the setting is rich with nuance. And sometimes the most memorable, unique chapters come from truly unexpected, even imperfect origins. Embrace the process, learn from what doesn't work, and enjoy the journey of crafting something truly your own. And, well, finding people whose feedback you trust is invaluable. Share your work with fellow hobbyists and lore enthusiasts who understand the 40k universe and can offer constructive insights. Their perspectives can help refine your ideas, spark new inspiration, and ensure your chapter grows into something even more compelling while staying true to your vision. Yeah? So, all throughout last week's video or the week before, whenever we did the 20 things, don't worry about it. Through the stuff with this that I've strayed away from the positive and spoken about some things that are a bit more negative that I'm getting a bit tired of seeing as someone who reviews homebrews 3 times a week. Don't worry about it. You have to make mistakes to improve. You have to get in there, get feedback. You got to fuck up, But as long as you're enjoying the process, as long as you are not forsaking your own sense of pride, you are doing it right. You have nothing to worry about, nothing to be ashamed of. There's no such thing as a homebrew that is without potential, you know?
I think I like to say, write more trim later. It's just write, have fun, enjoy the process, and eventually you'll find what you yourself maybe aren't really vibing with at the moment. Maybe down the line you'll find, this wasn't really my vibe. And maybe you learned something about the setting that you didn't before, that you realize, that means I should probably change that. Or maybe I would like to change it because of that. I just found out that the Space Marines apparently have something called reserve companies. That means that you shouldn't run around with all your chapters out in space at all times, because that can probably lead to bad situations. So I'm going to have to write that in now. So
well, you don't. Or keep in mind, reserve companies are only there for Codex compliant chapters.
Right, of course.
You know,
makes sense.
I do personally have a preference for Codex compliant chapters, but that doesn't mean that you can't do a non-compliant chapter that's good. You know, you can do that. You don't need reserve companies if your chapter is, you know, not Codex compliant. It just depends how you fulfill offensive, defensive, and supportive battlefield roles, you know.
Oh
for sure.
God.
Definitely.
Dude, in this vein, I feel it's very important that I share something from my past. I'm going to post this image here. Flash it on screen for all my shame to be born. This is an old chapter I did, and Red hates it because it's the same color scheme as one of his chapters, and I did it like 6 years ago. More than like no, actually,
yes.
God, yeah, about 6 years ago I made this, and oh my God, I hate them. I hate them. I hate these guys.
See,
it's the storm
that's
engines.
interesting because my first homebrew, well, not my first homebrew, my first proper Space Marine homebrew, which I will now supersede with this image, was a homebrew that I knew had problems. I knew it was going to be an uphill battle to make it law compliant. And I've come to accept, enjoy, and even love the things about it that are not law compliant. Even though it stayed that way, that doesn't mean I don't love this chapter. It doesn't mean I don't like talking about this chapter. It doesn't mean I don't like occasionally using or referencing this chapter. And it certainly doesn't mean that making this chapter wasn't fun. You know, and that, I think that's the whole point of, you know, this topic, have fun and make mistakes, because this chapter was filled to the brim with law compliancy mistakes, but by Christ was it fun. It wasn't fun getting chewed out when I told someone my chapter master was as old as the Primarchs. That was a bit of a silly, that was a silly Billy endeavor, and I had to learn from that one. But it was a fun homebrew, and this thing, you sometimes have to do stuff like that to, you know, learn.
Well, to learn and grow as a writer and a homebrewer.
Yeah, that's it. That's absolutely it. And again, I won't say it again, I'll say it for the last time now. As long as you're having fun, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. As long as you're enjoying yourself.
And take a page out of the Warhammer 40k setting as a whole. Don't get stagnant. Fucking be creative. Like, experiment. Evolve, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. 100%. Right. Do we have anything else we need to discuss, or can we hop on to some patron questions?
I think that's about it. That is all the homebrew I can cram out of me.
There's nothing more
for
to
the
say.
moment.
It's done.
It's done.
And by the way, guys, if you disagree with like anything we've said today, I'm afraid you're just wrong, and there's no hope for you. And you should.
No. You can't say that. We got a few. We got like, so the last video on last week or the week before had like a 99% like to dislike ratio, which is great. But there were some vocal people that were upset that we were just proposing our opinions as fact. I'm paraphrasing. I don't think anyone actually said that, but I'm paraphrasing. And the truth is, some things I read, because I read so many homebrews, some things I read do get me a little bit annoyed because it's like rereading the same trope over and over again that has like no nuance. That's kind of annoying. But the truth is, I believe first and foremost that homebrewing should be for enjoyment. This whole setting is for enjoyment. This is why when GW makes big sweeping law changes, I usually think twice before I get shitty about it. Because if something makes someone enjoy the hobby more, then that's something I have a hard time being antsy about. There's obviously exceptions to that, right? There'll always be things that are a bit silly or that GW's handled poorly. I think we can all agree on at least one or two things that GW has handled poorly, though I'm not going to say anything because one or two people are going to disagree. But there's always things, and I just want to know if you guys would like a really nice cowboy beans recipe.
Tom?
No, please,
you
Tom, no.
fucking
please.
dare.
Let me be.
I brought one up, and it reminds me of a recipe I tried a while ago.
I'm gonna Alright, that's it. I'm getting the fucking sheep, I'm getting the skillet, I'm preheating the fucking oven to 300 degrees.
350 degrees. We got to
Thomas?
we gotta cook some
Thomas?
diced. We gotta cook some diced onions. We gotta cook the ground beef.
I'm killing you! I'm killing you!
Oh, bonsoir. Thank you very much for reaching the end of this week's episode of the Astartes Anonymous podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting us by subscribing and maybe check out our social medias and Patreon down in the description below. It would be very appreciated. Alright, thank you all very much for watching. Have a nice evening. Bonsoir.
Right, Patron question. So, Jakul55 asks, what are your favorite helmets from the setting? And then he says, and why is it the beaky? Jakul, I have a very simple answer. Let's try and pick one or two helmets, ladies and gents, otherwise we'll be here all day, picking everything but Tacticus. My favorite helmet, Jakul, is the Mark V Heresy Armor helmet. That shit is brutal as fuck. I wish there was a plastic one of it somewhere that was good, but I'll have to settle for the Horus Heresy Apothecarian detachment version of the helmet for the only good one right now, but soon they'll release a whole batch of them. Other than that, I'd probably say the classic Terminator helmet. Fucking thing's iconic as fuck. It's gorgeous. Yeah.
I'm gonna say Mark III for the armor and Mark III for the helmet. Because...
Which Mark III though? There's two Mark IIIs now.
Oh. There are?
Have you not seen the new Mark IIIs?
Can you guys see?
Are you living under a rock?
No, I'm living in Sweden.
Alright, fucking Patrick. Right, let me go find you.
The old ones and the new ones, mates.
Oh, I'm getting old. What is this? New Mark IIIs? What?
I'll post a picture. I'll post a picture of the new ones and the old ones. So, here you go. Here's a good picture. So here's a good picture of both of them in one picture, of the new ones on the left and the old ones on the right.
I see. Well, I was just gonna...
I'm gonna assume you meant the old one.
I was just gonna say this one.
Yeah.
The old one, yeah, the old one, yeah. It's funny, I would say the new Mark III armor, I prefer, but the old Mark III helmet, I prefer.
I can see that.
I think I completely agree with that, personally.
Well, actually, I have a slight thing. My favorite helmet, old Mark III. It's so good. And the Mark 8/7. It's iconic. But as much as I like the new Mark IIIs, and they might just be my favorite armor, I prefer the old Mark III backpack.
Oh, really?
I think it looks way cooler. I don't like the new how stubby the new one is. I like that the old one feels very industrial. It looks like a machine.
The old one does feel like a... Yeah, it feels... The old one feels like something external that's been strapped on as a last addition, whereas the new one does look like it belongs. Well, I like that. I think the new one does have its merits, and I disagree in as much as that I prefer the new one, but I absolutely see what you mean, and I absolutely understand what you mean.
Also, because I'm a cheeky fucker, I also like the helmets for the new Deathwing Knights. That helmet is gorgeous.
That's fair. That's entirely fair. I think it's a bit too generic sci-fi for me, but I get why you like it. Right, shall we do one more Patron question?
Of course.
So let's find another one. Here's one. Zero Shade 05 asks, if you had the choice to add a new canon chapter based off another AP, who/what it would be? Do you mean IP? Based off another app?
IP?
He's just for an app based off another AP. If you had the choice to add a new canon chapter basis off of another app, who/what would it be and why? I'm so terribly sorry, Zero Shade, but I don't think I understand what you mean.
I'm guessing IP.
I'm gonna guess IP as well.
Well, tell you what, Zero Shade, we're gonna answer it as if it's another IP, and if we get it incorrect, just post the message, post the question again, and we'll come back to it next week. So, a new canon chapter based off another IP. Oh, I've got a few for that, but I've got one that rises to the top. Yeah. Do you know the cogs? Or the cog from Gears of War.
No, I never played it. I never had a console.
Basically, it's basically, I'd find it as if that was like a chapter, it would be somewhere between, it would almost be this weird somewhere between the Imperial Guard. It would be somewhere between the Kriegers and the Marines Malevolent.
Oh, okay.
I think. And I don't mean Marines Malevolent as in like they're evil per se, but it's that super industrial violence. And the Kriegers because cogs get spent like bullet casings. So it would be this like, it would kind of be very, I think it would be a little bit reminiscent of Great Crusade era Death Guard in a weird way. Probably less of the biological bullshit and more of the just attrition. Yeah, that's my answer.
I'm still thinking, honestly.
Right, I've got one. Right?
Yeah, go right ahead then.
I'm not a huge fan of Dark Souls. I appreciate it, I like it, but I think it would be really cool if there were a chapter based on the Abyss Watchers. And isn't that just like a Space Marine chapter name? Abyss Watchers.
Isn't that just like fucking 4th edition Dark Angels?
Kinda? I think it's like if the Dark Angels were sent to do the Astral Claw's duty.
Oh, that's a cool idea.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that.
And I love their little hat helmet with like the peak.
Yeah.
I'll get an image. Yeah, there we go.
You got any ideas, Moots?
Yes, I do. I have decided on an IP. Let me introduce you to the JoJo Marines.
Okay, you're right. Moots is fucking... Moots is just spent, honestly.
Imagine a full chapter of Marines that summon stands. and fight the forces, the enemies of the Imperium with said stands. Imagine Star Platinum, if you will, beating the shit out of a Carnifex.
Oh, Moots.
Oh, God.
Oh, Moots. This is why your homebrew sucks.
Thank you!
Dude, I don't know how, but you found a way to make Space Marines more homoerotic.
I mean, it wasn't that hard, honestly.
I just want to read a comment from the last Homebrew podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, at 1 hour, 18 minutes, and 28 seconds, I said something near and dear to my heart, at which point this user had an ad play, and it was a McDonald's ad.
God damn it. God damn it.
Thank you for watching the video with ads, kind viewer.
Much appreciated.
Absolutely on blast.
No, but a big salute to all the viewers watching with ads. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Big salute.
Huge salute to all the people who commented on the last one and who are going to comment on this one. The approach to do a podcast that was very homebrew centric got an absolutely colossal viewer to comment ratio in comparison to what is like the norm. Hopefully this one will get similar numbers. I think I want to talk about some of the people's critique of the last episode, because I think some people had some genuinely good critique. One of the ones that prompted this episode was how some people thought we were a little bit too harsh, and I totally see where they were coming from. But I think what I would say to those people is, just from my own memory and watching back and having to edit the episode and re-listening to it over and over again, I think some of the things that might have come off as harsh were, I'm going to be honest, my poor attempt at being funny. Because I really do believe that the most important thing about Homebrew is to enjoy it, to put your own mark on the setting, and if it turns out to be something that self-proclaimed Homebrew experts like, then great. And if it's not, who gives a fuck, you know? I'll say this now, unless for some reason you've decided you want my approval for your Homebrew, I would implore you to not give a fuck about my opinion. You should only care about the contents of this episode that you feel like you can learn and grow with, and everything else, throw in the bin, you know?
We are by no means... Sorry, continue.
I wish when I was learning to homebrew, the people who helped me learn to be a better, what I consider to be a better homebrewer, I wish they were a little bit less harsh. I wish that I had a slightly softer hand to guide me into being a better homebrewer, and I would really like to be a slightly softer hand for a lot of these people, because I feel like maybe in some of my attempts at humor or over-exaggerating my distaste for certain things, I think I came off as a little bit harsh about a few things when I didn't mean to. So it's like I just feel like I need to own that a little bit for like that the 1% of people who dislike that video on that basis. And it's entirely fair, right? It's entirely fair to not like something I'm saying. I really tried to get that point across.
Yeah, likewise, I'd like to apologize to any official Warhammer authors listening, and I've offended your work.
Yeah, except for Robbie McNiven, what you did with the Ashen Claws would be unforgivable if you didn't make the Kacharagons as cool as you had. But really, go back and ask them if you can retcon the Ashen Claws, because that's some stupid shit, man.
No, but genuinely, if there are Black Library authors listening, I'm hamming it up. You guys are chill.
I remember how you said, I'm sorry for anyone thinking about reading Wrath of Iron. And then we had a comment, which was which is like someone who really liked the Wrath of Iron, apparently.
Dude, one of literally the model I selected for the model of the week today, their name is Wrath of Iron. I cannot escape it, and frankly, I think I'm just going to have to read it again. Genuinely, I'm going to have to read it again and actually try and analyze it and see if I'm being an idiot, or if I was right the first time when I've wasted another 10 hours. We'll see.
Well, don't judge yourself too harshly for disliking it. It's like, when it comes to 40k books, there is so much opinions going around. There is no definitive, here's good, here's bad. Unless we're talking about the Ashen Claws. There is no definitive, here's good, here's bad. You know, I'm in social circles of 40k YouTubers and hobbyists who as we've made no secret of this, who really, really highly rate the Night Lords Omnibus and ADB's work on that. And I said in one short, opening little bit, an offhand comment about how good the Omnibus was. And despite having so much that opinion supported by so many people in the community that I trust and that I look up to and whose opinions I believe in, despite that, I still got blasted with comments telling me that I was fucking insane and that ADB is not a good author, apparently. So I wouldn't worry about shitting on the Wrath of Iron, because you could say the Wrath of Iron is good, and then that guy would have instead been somebody else commenting about how silly you are for saying it was good.
That's true.
You know, it's always an uphill battle, so you just kind of got to embrace and own your own sort of thing and just accept that everyone has different opinions, I suppose.
Well, that's the thing, yeah. I mean, we just happen to be public figures that have a platform to say our opinions, and that comes with people judging those opinions because we are public, and you know, that is what it is.
There is one thing that irked me a little bit though. There was one guy who was trying to explain that who really was a bit fixed on the idea that Space Marines couldn't have over 1,000 Marines, and was like, oh well, you can get around it if you're a Space Wolves successor, because the Space Wolves ignore it and their successors ignore it. And it's like the one example of the Space Wolves ignoring it was the Battle of the Fang, which is this one little niche moment But let's say it's not. Let's say that's a big moment. Even though there's no other reference of Space Wolves ignoring Codex compliancy that I know of, at least. It's like, okay, well, they're a First Founding Legion. I can just about get over that. That's something that's fine. But there's not really any source for their successors doing the same. And I think his logic was Space Wolf successors, or this one Space Wolf successor, I think it was the Wolf Spears, would like fight at least like minimum fighting strength or some shit like that, implying that 1,000 Marines was like the minimum they had, when like fighting strength is for most chapters like anywhere between half to 2/3, because they fight as companies, not as, even though it's not a codex. And I think he said something like how they're not a codex compliant, so it's safe to infer they'll have more Marines. No, it's not. It's not. It's a shame, because I think I tried to mention it as one of the big points in that episode about how it's a shame when homebrewers use super niche examples to try and justify non-lore things. But I said to someone, I had a really nice conversation with someone in the Discord, really nice chat, about a similar sort of topic, and it was about something that's about traitor gene seed, yada yada. And I said to him something near the end that I really am going to have to try and remember, but it was something along the lines of, it's better to accept that you don't like something, that you don't like something in the lore, and that you're homebrewing around it because you don't like it, or you're homebrewing ignoring it because you think it's a silly point in the lore, than it is to homebrew around it and rely on semantics and pedantics to say that it actually is lore compliant. You know what I mean? Like, if somebody sends me a homebrew and it's not lore compliant, but it's written really fucking well, that's a good fucking homebrew. Because a good homebrew is not defined by whether it's lore compliant or not. It's defined by whether love, passion, and writing efforts got into it.
And that's really all we are passing on here. I mean, we even if it is coated in the don'ts, it still comes from a place of deep care. All of us here are deeply entrenched in the hobby and have been doing it for a while. Not just us, but the other guys on the team as well. And the other guys,
it's all the same thing. Like Red, for example, has a bunch of things that in his chapter that I'm not particularly convinced are lore compliant. Still a great homebrew. It's still an interesting and compelling homebrew.
Absolutely.
Because you can see all the passion he's put into it, and into the models and into the characters. I think some people,
we're just happy to share our own takes, our own experiences, and our own view on it. And honestly, the fact that people are so happy, like that so many people are actually are engaging with this, just tells me that there hasn't been anything like this. And that's fucking the fact that people enjoy it is super fun, because hey, we're all just partaking in the same hobby and enjoying the same stuff, and if we can all be happy and sharing in that, fucking kumbaya, my lord, and fucking hallelujah.
Kumbaya, my lord, let's fucking go. Absolutely. But this is the thing, like, I'll tell you, we'll throw this out, because we'll end this in just a sec, because it's coming up to like 4 hours of recording. This will get condensed down to a bit shorter.
Half past 1 in the morning for me, let's go.
But if you're still listening, if you're still on the end and you can hear the outro music playing over and over again, you're still listening. If you're enjoying the Homebrew podcast, we are looking at doing more. We've got 2 silly ideas. One of them, we're not sure how we're going to manage it yet, is to like sit down for a day and do a podcast where the 3 of us plus maybe Alex try to make a homebrew live on the podcast.
Absolute stupidity.
It'll be absolutely cooked. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know about you two, but I'd love the idea to do a whole podcast. It might not be a full 3-hour one like this, or 4-hour one. This might be like an hour and a half, it might be a short one. But I'd love to do a podcast where we explore the concepts behind potential homebrew relics for Space Marine chapters.
Oh, of course, yes.
That'd be fun.
Oh, that sounds brilliant.
I'd really enjoy that. I know I'd have a lot of fun with that. because I've come up with some really wacky, certainly not particularly law compliant homebrew relics in the past, and I'd love to talk about them.
I have a silly fucking idea for a podcast episode. I don't know if I should say it now or if I should save it. Actually,
Ooh, how silly! How silly is it on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 being not silly, 10 being silly that it's going to give me heart palpitations.
7, 8.
Oh, I'm in. Tell me. Come on. Don't hold back. Don't hold back. Come on, tell us.
Game show where Zarek or someone cooks up a bunch of relics, some real, some false, and we try to figure out which one is which.
Hell yeah! I'm on board with that. That sounds brilliant.
Okay, yeah. But you've got to give some of the real ones. You got to give all of them false names.
Yeah,
because I'm sure my right. Because I've forgotten what the Cacodominus does, but I know it's called the Cacodominus. So if you give me I forgot what it says. So if you say the Cacodominus, I'm going to be on that. But if you describe what it does and give it a different name, I'm probably going to fail.
Yeah, that sounds brilliant.
Fuck yeah.
That'd be very funny. That'd be very funny. I'll tell you, we're gonna get we're gonna get like 1 or 2 of the law crimes guys on for that. Those guys really know their
We
encyclopedic
can finally
law.
do the Family Feud
Amber King.
episode.
That'd be fun as hell.
Right. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. If you're enjoying the podcast, please, as per the outro, take a look at Patreon, jump in the Discord, subscribe to the YouTube channel, send this to your parents, your friends, your colleagues, tell them that their homebrews suck.
Your dogs, your cat, their hamster.
Your dogs, your cats, don't forget your farmers and the sheep and the kangaroos and the budgies and the zebras. And as always, unsubscribe to the Game Storyteller.
Subscribe to my channel in the description below.
I've ended the last 3 episodes by saying that. All right. You take it easy, everyone. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.